There was a time, not so long ago, when the only secrets the ocean held were the gentle songs of the deep and the slow, rhythmic breathing of the tides. Before the world changed, before the water grew heavy with shadows and the nights became things to fear, the great Atlantic was simply a wild and beautiful neighbor. It was a vast, glittering expanse of blue and gray, a rolling meadow of water that connected distant shores and carried the quiet hopes of ordinary men. If you were to stand on a quiet beach in those final, fading days of summer, you would only hear the soothing rush of waves smoothing out the sand, and the distant, mournful cry of seagulls dancing on the breeze. Out there, beyond the curve of the earth, the ocean was a gentle workplace. It belonged to the fishermen with weather-beaten faces, men who knew the moods of the water better than they knew the streets of their own towns. Picture a small, sturdy trawler bobbing gently on the swells, bathed in the amber light of early morning. The wooden deck is slick with sea spray, and the air smells sharply of salt and wet hemp. A crew of 4 men work in quiet harmony, pulling in nets that shimmer with the silver catch of the day. They do not speak much. They do not need to. They communicate in the shared language of tired muscles, knowing nods, and the comfortable silence that settles between old friends. One of them, a man with salt and pepper hair and a thick wool sweater knitted by his daughter, pauses to wipe his brow. He leans against the wooden rail, feeling the familiar, comforting hum of the small engine beneath his boots. He looks out toward the horizon, where the sky meets the water in a perfect, unbroken line. In his pocket, he carries a small, polished stone his grandson gave him for luck. To him, this ocean is not a battlefield. It is a provider. It is the steady heartbeat of his life, a place of profound peace where the complicated troubles of the land cannot reach him. He takes a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, entirely unaware that the world he knows is quietly slipping away. Miles away, on the deck of a slow-moving merchant freighter, the afternoon sun paints long, golden shadows across the steel hull. The ship is a rusty, faithful workhorse of the sea, carrying crates of tea, bundles of cotton, and sacks of grain from one continent to another. She moves with a gentle, rocking sway, cradled by the long ocean swells. Deep inside the ship, in the warm, dimly lit mess hall, the air is thick with the sweet smell of pipe tobacco and roasting coffee. A group of sailors sits around a scratched wooden table, playing a quiet game of cards. The cards are worn at the edges, soft from years of shuffling. The men talk in low, rumbling voices. They speak of simple things. They talk about the wives they left behind in rainy coastal towns, about the children who are growing up too fast, and about the small gardens they hope to tend when they finally swallow the anchor and retire to the land. In the corner of the room, a young boy, barely older than a teenager, sits alone under the soft, yellow glow of a swinging lantern. He is on his very first voyage. The gentle rocking of the ship still feels like a wonder to him. He has a notebook spread open on his lap, and a fountain pen clutched tightly in his hand. He is writing a letter to his mother. He chews on his lip, searching for the right words to describe the sheer, terrifying beauty of the night sky over the open water. He writes about how the stars look like spilled sugar on black velvet, and how the ocean glows with a strange, magical blue light when the dolphins play in the ship's wake. He writes that he is eating well, that the older men are kind to him, and that he is not afraid. He folds the letter carefully, tucking it into an envelope, trusting that the reliable mail ships will carry his love safely across the waves. He does not know that soon, letters like his will become the most precious, fragile things in the world. Back on the shore, the coastal towns are bathed in the soft, fading light of late afternoon. These are places where life moves at the slow, steady pace of the tides. Cobblestone streets wind down to harbors filled with the gentle clinking of rigging against masts. In the windows of small cottages, lamps are being lit one by one, casting warm, inviting glows out into the gathering dusk. Imagine a young woman standing on a wooden pier, the wind gently tugging at the edges of her coat. She is waiting for the ferry to bring her husband home from his shift at the docks. She watches the water lap lazily against the pilings, a soothing, rhythmic sound that she has known since childhood. Up on the rugged cliffs above the town, the old lighthouse keeper climbs the spiraling iron stairs of his tower. He carries a soft cloth and a tin of polish, moving with the practiced grace of a man who has done this 1,000 times before. He carefully cleans the massive glass lenses, ensuring that the light will shine bright and true across the dark water. For generations, this light has been a promise of safety, a guiding star for tired sailors looking for the way home. It is a comforting presence, a beacon of hope in the night. The keeper looks out over the vast, darkening ocean, feeling a deep sense of pride in his work. He cannot fathom a tomorrow where his beautiful light will be turned off, where the coastlines will be plunged into an anxious, suffocating darkness to hide from unseen terrors. As the sun begins its final descent, the sky catches fire. It is a breathtaking display of colors, deep, bruised purples fading into soft lilacs, streaks of burning orange, and a pale, delicate pink that kisses the edges of the clouds. It is the last golden sunset of an era. The water turns into a mirror of molten copper, reflecting the fiery sky with a calm, glassy stillness. But beneath this beautiful, tranquil surface, in the cold, silent depths where the light of the sun cannot reach, a different kind of world is beginning to stir. In distant naval yards, hidden by the rising mist, young men in heavy sweaters are carrying their duffel bags down narrow, iron ladders. They are stepping into sleek, dark vessels that look like strange, metal whales. These boys are no different from the young sailor writing letters on the freighter, or the fisherman mending his nets. They have sweethearts who kissed them goodbye at the train station. They carry photographs of smiling families tucked into their breast pockets. They have private fears, quiet hopes, and a deep, unspoken desire to simply do their duty and return home. They settle into their cramped, echoing quarters, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and diesel oil. They arrange their small bunks, hanging up a lucky charm or a picture of a little sister. They are innocent to the true weight of the water above them, and to the terrible, profound isolation that awaits them in the abyss. They believe they are just embarking on another voyage, another patrol, another chapter in the long history of men going to sea. As the iron hatches are pulled shut with a heavy, hollow thud, they seal away the fresh air and the fading light of the afternoon. The ballast tanks fill with a slow, rushing sound, and the dark silhouettes slip quietly beneath the waves, leaving nothing behind but a swirl of white foam that quickly dissolves into the vastness of the ocean. Above them, the night finally settles over the Atlantic. It is a quiet, peaceful darkness. The stars emerge one by one, cold and brilliant, watching over the ships that crawl slowly across the surface, and the silent shadows that glide beneath them. The ocean breathes its eternal, rhythmic breath, a vast and indifferent cradle holding thousands of fragile human lives. The fishermen sleep in their hammocks, dreaming of the morning catch. The young merchant sailor rests his head on his pillow, his letter tucked safely in his trunk. The woman in the coastal town finishes her tea, the lighthouse beam sweeping a comforting rhythm across her window pane. And deep below, a young submariner lies in his narrow bunk, listening to the strange, echoing sounds of the deep, wondering what tomorrow will bring. It is the final, quiet moment of a world holding its breath. The golden light has faded, and the long, dark night of the ocean is about to begin. But for now, just for this one last evening, there is only the gentle rocking of the waves, the soft whisper of the wind, and the peaceful, dreamless sleep of men on the water. There is a silence that belongs only to the harbor in the hour just before the dawn, a heavy, velvet quiet wrapped in the cold breath of the sea. Long before the sun even begins to think about warming the horizon, the coastal towns are draped in a thick, silver mist. It rolls in off the dark water, creeping over the seawalls and drifting through the narrow, cobbled streets. This fog softens the edges of the world, turning the towering cranes and brick warehouses into ghostly silhouettes. In this suspended, twilight hour, the world feels incredibly small, reduced only to what you can see within the reach of a ship's lantern. And it is here, hidden beneath this blanket of gray, that the very first departures begin. There are no brass bands playing on the piers. There are no cheering crowds throwing ribbons or waving brightly colored flags. The air is too heavy for that, the hour too solemn. Instead, there is only the gentle, rhythmic slapping of the tide against the wooden pilings, and the muted, shuffling footsteps of families walking slowly toward the water's edge. Down by the docks, tethered to the heavy iron cleats, lie the boats. They do not look like machines of war in this soft light. They look like sleeping giants, great iron whales resting in the shallows, rising and falling with the gentle, breathing rhythm of the tide. Their long, dark hulls are slick with the morning dew, gleaming faintly whenever the sweeping beam of a distant lighthouse catches their wet steel. They are cold and unyielding to the touch, yet they are about to become the entire universe for the young men preparing to step inside. These young men are, in truth, little more than boys. They wear heavy wool sweaters that smell of damp sheep and home-cooked meals. Some have collars pulled up tight against the chill, while others stand with their hands shoved deep into their pockets, trying to hide a nervous tremor. They are fishermen's sons, bakery clerks, and students who, just weeks ago, were worrying about school examinations and village dances. Now, they stand on the edge of the known world, carrying canvas duffel bags packed with thick socks, simple uniforms, and a few precious pieces of the lives they are leaving behind. Beside them stand their families, huddled together against the creeping damp. The goodbyes said in the mist are quiet, intimate things. A mother reaches out with a trembling hand to smooth the lapel of her son's jacket. She does not speak of the vast, terrifying ocean or the dark depths. Instead, she tells him to remember to dry his boots, to eat whatever the cook puts in front of him, and to share the tin of butter cookies she baked late last night. She presses a small, knitted scarf into his hands, the soft yarn carrying the familiar scent of lavender and the warmth of their parlor stove. A father stands nearby, his weathered face tight with an emotion he cannot quite express. He is a man of the land or perhaps a sailor of the surface, and this new kind of voyage beneath the waves is strange and unnerving to him. He simply places a heavy, reassuring hand on his boy's shoulder. They exchange a long, silent look that speaks volumes, a look of immense pride, tangled deeply with a quiet, private fear. He hands his son a worn pocket watch, a family heirloom whose steady, rhythmic ticking might bring comfort in the long, silent nights to come. Further down the pier, a young submariner stands with his sweetheart. They are wrapped in a shared coat, trying to steal one last moment of warmth from each other. She traces the brass buttons on his uniform, memorizing the shape of his face in the dim light. She slips a folded piece of paper into his breast pocket, whispering a promise that she will wait by the window every evening, watching the horizon until he returns. He kisses her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, committing it to memory so he can summon it later when the air grows stale and heavy with diesel. When the quiet orders are finally given, the movement is slow and deliberate. The boys pick up their bags and turn toward the gangways. Leaving the solid, reassuring earth behind is a profound transition. As they step off the wooden planks and onto the metal casing of the iron whale, their boots ring out with a hollow, echoing thud. It is the sound of crossing a threshold. They walk carefully along the narrow, wet deck, the mist swirling around their ankles, until they reach the open hatch. The hatch is a small, dark circle, breathing out the distinct, complex scent of the boat, a mixture of lubricating grease, battery acid, damp canvas, and cold steel. One by one, they grasp the cold iron rungs and begin to descend. Climbing down the ladder is like stepping out of the waking world and into a strange, metallic dream. The natural light of the morning vanishes, replaced by the soft, artificial glow of small bulbs running along the ceiling. The air immediately feels different, thicker, stiller, separated from the breeze of the harbor. As a young sailor reaches the bottom of the ladder, he steps onto the metal floor plates and takes his first real look at his new home. It is incredibly narrow. The curved walls press in closely on all sides, lined with a dizzying maze of pipes, valves, and twisting wires. Every inch of space is utilized. There are no straight lines, no empty corners, just the relentless, curving embrace of the pressure hull. It feels impossibly cramped, yet there is a strange, womb-like safety to it. It is a vessel designed to shield them from the crushing weight of the ocean, a steel bubble that will hold their lives in its mechanical hands. The crew begins to move through the narrow passageways, turning sideways to let each other pass. There is a hushed, busy energy as they stow their gear. A boy finds his assigned bunk, tucked away beneath a torpedo or suspended above a rumbling battery compartment. The mattress is thin, the blanket rough, but he carefully arranges his few belongings. He pins a small photograph of his family to the curved wall beside his pillow. He places his father's pocket watch in a small mesh netting. In this tiny, confined space, no larger than a coffin, he tries to carve out a sliver of home. In the tiny galley, the cook is already at work, trying to bring a sense of normalcy to the morning. The comforting smell of brewing coffee begins to drift through the passageways, mixing with the sharp scent of the machinery. He hums a quiet, familiar folk tune as he wipes down the metal counters, offering a warm smile to the nervous boys who wander past. It is a small act of kindness, a gentle reminder that even in this iron belly, humanity remains intact. The commander of the boat stands near the periscope in the control room. He is older than the rest, his face lined with the quiet responsibility of leadership. He watches his young crew settle in, his eyes soft with a protective affection. He knows the sheer vastness of the ocean they are about to face. He knows the deep, creeping isolation of the submerged world. But for now, he simply speaks to them in a calm, steady voice, offering quiet encouragement, setting the rhythm of their new life together. Up above, on the casing, the last lines are cast off. The heavy, wet ropes slip from the iron cleats and splash into the dark water. Deep inside the boat, the massive diesel engines cough and rumble to life. The sound is a low, vibrating thrum that travels through the soles of their boots, into their bones, and settles in their chests. It is the heartbeat of the iron whale, steady and powerful. The submarine slowly pulls away from the pier. To the families left standing on the dock, the dark shape of the boat simply dissolves into the mist. There is no grand departure, no fading silhouette against the horizon. One moment the boat is there, a solid presence in the fog, and the next, it is gone, swallowed completely by the gray morning. The water churns gently where the propellers have stirred the shallows, leaving behind a trail of white foam that quickly smooths over, as if the ocean is erasing the very memory of their departure. The mothers, fathers, and sweethearts stand shivering on the empty pier, staring into the impenetrable fog. They hold their coats tightly around themselves, their hands resting on empty pockets, feeling the profound absence of the boys they just held. They listen to the fading hum of the engines until it is entirely replaced by the cry of the gulls and the lonely lapping of the tide. Then, slowly, quietly, they turn and walk back up the cobblestone streets to their empty kitchens, where the tea has gone cold, to begin the long, agonizing act of waiting. Inside the submarine, the gentle rocking of the surface waves begins to smooth out as they move further from the shore. The young sailor sitting on his narrow bunk reaches into his breast pocket and pulls out the folded note his sweetheart gave him. Under the dim, amber light, he carefully unfolds the paper. The handwriting is delicate, slightly smudged by the morning mist. "I am with you," it reads simply. "No matter how deep the water, my heart is right there beside yours." He smiles softly, pressing the paper back into his pocket, directly over his heart. The fear that had been fluttering in his stomach begins to quiet, replaced by a deep, quiet resilience. He leans his head back against the cold steel of the hull, closing his eyes. He listens to the rhythmic breathing of the engines, the gentle sloshing of water against the outside of the casing, and the quiet murmurs of his new brothers in the dark. They are moving away from the shallows now, gliding silently out into the vast, unknown expanses of the open Atlantic. They are suspended in a twilight world, floating between the sky they have left behind and the profound, eternal dark of the ocean floor. It is the beginning of a long, isolating journey. But in this quiet moment, wrapped in the protective belly of the iron whale, there is only the comforting hum of the machinery, the shared warmth of huddled bodies, and the gentle, rocking lullaby of the deep. They are together, drifting softly into the mist, carrying the fragile, beautiful light of their humanity out into the endless gray. As the final tether to the land slips silently into the churning water, a profound and heavy twilight settles over the rusted decks of the merchant ships. There is a unique kind of quiet that falls upon a vessel when the last outline of the coastline dissolves into the mist. It is the silence of an invisible bridge breaking, the gentle but firm realization that the earth has been left behind, and now there is only the vast, rolling expanse of the sea. Out here, on the edge of the gathering gloom, the water is a deep, bruised shade of indigo, rising and falling in long, rhythmic swells that cradle the heavy iron hulls. These are not sleek ships built for speed or combat. They are the weary, faithful workhorses of the ocean. Their paint is chipped by years of salt and wind, their decks are piled high with wooden crates of tea, canvas sacks of flour, and heavy bundles of raw cotton. They sit low in the cold water, moving with a slow, swaying, deliberate grace. And upon these floating islands of steel and wood are men who never asked to be heroes. They are simply men, fathers with weather-beaten faces, uncles who tell quiet jokes around the galley table, and young boys whose hands are still soft, holding tight to the ship's rails as they stare out into the deepening dark. As the evening light fades, a new and solemn ritual begins across the fleet. It is the darkening of the ships. Under the soft, whispered orders of the boatswain, the crew moves from deck to deck, sealing away the light. Heavy canvas covers are lashed tightly over the skylights. Thick, light-proof curtains are drawn across the windows of the bridge. Every porthole, every tiny glass eye looking out into the ocean, is closed, dogged down tightly, and covered. The ocean has become a place where light is no longer a comfort, but a danger. To show a lantern, to let even the smallest sliver of gold escape into the night, is to call out to the unseen shadows that now slip quietly beneath the waves. And so, the ships must become ghosts. They wrap themselves in the cloak of the night, their towering smokestacks blending into the heavy, gray clouds, their engines reduced to a low, muffled thrumming that matches the slow beating of a resting heart. But while the outside of the ship is surrendered to the cold and the dark, the inside becomes a hidden sanctuary. Below the waterline, in the narrow, curving corridors and the cramped, steel-walled cabins, life continues in a hushed, gentle murmur. The air down here is thick and warm. It smells of damp wool sweaters drying over steam pipes, of roasted coffee beans, and the rich, sweet scent of pipe tobacco drifting from the mess hall. There is the constant, soothing vibration of the massive engines vibrating through the floor plates, a steady thrum-thrum-thrum that hums against the soles of the sailors' boots and vibrates softly in their chests. It is a comforting sound, the sound of the ship's heartbeat, reminding them that they are moving forward, inch by inch, toward a distant, peaceful harbor. In the dimly lit mess hall, a handful of men sit around a scarred wooden table. The room sways in a slow, hypnotic rhythm as the ship rides over the long ocean swells. The men lean into the tilt of the room with practiced ease, their bodies naturally absorbing the motion of the sea. They do not speak much. A quiet unease has settled over the crew, a soft, unspoken understanding that the world outside the steel bulkheads has changed. They are alone in the vastness, floating above deep, unknowable waters. Yet, in this quiet apprehension, there are small, beautiful moments of everyday grace. An older sailor, a man whose hair is the color of sea foam and whose hands are rough from decades of hauling ropes, slides a ceramic mug of warm, milky tea across the table to a younger hand. The boy is pale, his eyes wide with the nervous energy of his very first crossing. The older man does not offer hollow reassurances or loud words of false bravery. He simply gives the boy a warm, crinkled smile, tapping the side of the mug with a thick finger. "Drink it while it's hot, lad," he whispers, his voice like the rumble of pebbles on a beach. It settles the spirit. The boy nods, wrapping his cold hands around the radiating warmth of the clay mug, feeling a small, grounding anchor of comfort in the older man's quiet kindness. Down the narrow passageway, behind a heavy metal door, is the crew's sleeping quarters. The air here is even warmer, heavy with the sound of quiet breathing and the rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers. Stacked against the curved walls are the narrow bunks, each one a tiny, private universe pulled tight against the immense pressure of the sea outside. Because the portholes have been bolted shut and covered with heavy iron deadlights, the cabin is bathed in a soft, eternal twilight. Suspended from the low ceiling is a single, low-wattage light bulb encased in a wire cage. As the ship rolls gently from port to starboard, the bulb swings on its wire, casting long, slow-moving shadows that dance across the riveted walls. It sways like a gentle pendulum, keeping the slow time of the ocean's breathing. In one of the lower bunks, a man lies on his side, his knees pulled up slightly in the cramped space. He has a rough woolen blanket pulled up to his waist, and in his hands, resting on his chest, is a small, worn notepad. He holds a fountain pen, its silver nib glinting faintly in the swaying amber light. He is writing a letter home. This is the ritual of the evening. Across the ship, in corners of the galley, sitting on upside-down wooden crates in the storeroom, or tucked away in their narrow beds, men are putting pen to paper. They are reaching out across the dark water, trying to build fragile bridges of words back to the places they love. The man in the lower bunk pauses, chewing thoughtfully on the end of his pen. He listens to the water rushing past the steel plates just inches from his ear. It sounds like a great, soft rushing of wind, a constant shhhh that surrounds him. He does not write about the water. He does not write about the heavy, suffocating darkness outside, or the quiet fear that flutters in his stomach when the ship drops into the trough of a particularly large wave. Instead, he writes about the sunlight. He writes to his wife, whose face he can see perfectly whenever he closes his eyes. He asks if the yellow roses by the front gate have bloomed yet. He reminds her to check the latch on the back window before the autumn winds begin to howl off the moors. He writes about the ship's cat, a scruffy orange tabby that has taken to sleeping in the warmth of the boiler room, and how the cook saved him an extra piece of fried fish from the evening meal. He focuses on these small, beautiful, ordinary things because they are his armor. They are the warm embers of home that he carries in his heart, keeping the cold of the Atlantic at bay. With every loop of his handwriting, with every soft scratch of the nib against the paper, he is whispering to his wife that he is safe, that he is still the man she kissed goodbye on the rainy docks, and that he will return to her. In a bunk across the aisle, a much younger sailor is struggling with his own letter. He has a piece of cheap, thin paper resting on a hardcover book on his lap. He is writing to his mother. He wants to tell her that he is brave, that he is a seasoned sailor now, untouched by the vastness of the ocean. But the swaying shadows and the profound isolation of the night make him feel very small. He stares at the blank page, a single tear slipping quietly down his cheek, catching the dim light before splashing softly onto the paper, blurring a drop of blue ink. He quickly brushes his face with the rough sleeve of his sweater, taking a deep, shaky breath. He dips his pen and begins to write. He tells his mother about the stars he saw the night before, how they looked like a handful of diamonds scattered across a velvet blanket. He tells her that the ocean is beautiful, even when it is gray, and that the rhythmic rocking of the ship puts him to sleep just like the cradle she used to rock him in. It is a quiet, everyday heroism, the gentle act of swallowing his own fear so that the woman reading the letter weeks from now will only feel peace. These letters are the true cargo of the ship. They are the secret, flickering lights hidden behind the blacked-out portholes. On the outside, the vessel is a dark, silent shadow slipping through the mist, invisible and cold. But inside, behind the steel and the canvas, there are 100 tiny flames of hope, of love, of longing. Every word written in the swaying light is a candle burning softly against the gloom. As the night deepens, the scratching of the pen slowly ceases. One by one, the caps are screwed back onto the ink bottles. The delicate pages are carefully folded, the creases smoothed down by heavy, calloused thumbs. The envelopes are sealed and tucked away into safe places, slipped between the pages of a small leather Bible, hidden at the bottom of a canvas kit bag, or placed under a thin pillow, close to the dreamer's head. They rest there, holding the fragile weight of human connection, waiting patiently for the day they will finally find a mailbox on a distant, sunlit shore. The men begin to settle into their blankets. The quiet murmurs in the passageways fade away, replaced entirely by the symphony of the ship. The slow, rhythmic creak of the wooden bulkheads flexing with the waves. The distant, muffled clatter of a pot in the galley. The deep, steady, comforting thrum of the engine pushing them ever forward. The young boy in the upper bunk closes his eyes, letting the gentle sway of the ship roll him softly from side to side. The older sailor pulls his woolen cap down over his eyes, his breathing slowing to match the deep, slow breathing of the ocean outside. The single light bulb continues its slow, hypnotic swing, casting its warm, golden glow over the sleeping men. Outside, the Atlantic is vast, cold, and cloaked in an impenetrable, gathering gloom. The shadows beneath the waves may be stirring, and the journey ahead may be long and shrouded in uncertainty. But here, in the warm, beating heart of the ship, there is only peace. There is the quiet resilience of ordinary men, resting in the cradle of the deep. There is the lingering warmth of shared tea, the unspoken bonds of quiet companionship, and the soft, folded promises of tomorrow tucked safely beneath their resting heads. The ship sails on, a gentle, rocking sanctuary pushing through the dark. And as the sailors drift into a deep and dreamless sleep, the ocean simply carries them, a vast and soothing mother gently rocking her children through the long, quiet night. To stand alone on the open ocean at midnight is to realize that the world is made entirely of water and stars. Far away from the edges of the continents, where the last light of the lighthouses has long since faded into nothing, the Atlantic Ocean exists in a state of eternal, magnificent solitude. It is a world without landmarks, without roads, without memory. It does not know the names of the men who cross it, and it does not concern itself with the invisible lines drawn on paper maps. It simply breathes. It rises and falls in slow, rhythmic swells, a giant, slumbering chest heaving in the dark, driven by the pull of the moon and the ancient, invisible winds. Out here, the sheer scale of the emptiness is enough to make a man hold his breath. For thousands of miles in every direction, there is nothing but the deep, rolling indigo of the water, meeting the black velvet of the sky in a perfect, unbroken curve. To be a sailor suspended on this surface is to feel smaller than a grain of sand, floating on a fragile leaf over a bottomless chasm. On the deck of a solitary merchant ship, slowly carving its way through the swells, a young man stands his watch. He is wrapped in a heavy wool coat, the collar turned up high to shield his neck from the damp, biting breeze. The night air is cold and pure, tasting of salt and ancient ice. He leans against the icy iron rail, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and looks out into the void. There is a profound and heavy silence that settles over the ship in the middle of the night. The great steam engines hum deep within the belly of the vessel, a soft, vibrating heartbeat that travels up through the decks and into the soles of his boots. It is a comforting rhythm, a steady promise that they are moving forward, inch by inch, across this endless expanse. Aside from that gentle thrum, the only sound is the soft, continuous tearing of the water as the ship's bow pushes through the waves, and the long, hissing sigh of the whitecaps dissolving into the dark. As he stares out into the blackness, the young sailor feels the weight of a profound, sweeping isolation. The land, with its warm fireplaces, its cobblestone streets, and the cheerful clatter of teacups in a bustling kitchen, feels like a beautiful dream he might have had a lifetime ago. Out here, those things do not seem entirely real. He is tethered to reality only by the swaying deck beneath his feet and the warm memories he keeps carefully folded in his heart. He shifts his weight, finding the natural balance that all sailors learn, swaying in perfect harmony with the rolling of the ship. He thinks of his mother, sitting by a window thousands of miles away, perhaps looking up at the very same moon that now casts a pale, silver ribbon across the water. He wonders if she is knitting, the needles clicking softly in the quiet parlor. He wonders if she knows that in this vast, lonely night, the thought of her smile is the only thing keeping the cold from settling into his bones. Down the deck, another figure emerges from the shadows. It is an older sailor, coming to relieve him of his watch. The older man carries 2 chipped enamel mugs, the steam rising from the dark, bitter coffee in twisting wisps. He hands one to the young man without a word. Their fingers brush against the warm metal, a small, vital spark of human connection in the freezing night. They stand together for a moment, sipping the hot liquid, looking out at the stars. They do not need to speak. In the face of the ocean's vastness, words seem clumsy and inadequate. They share a quiet nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability, before the young man turns to make his way below deck, to the warmth of his narrow bunk and the gentle escape of sleep. But the ocean's breath does not only shape the world above the waves. Beneath the silver-touched surface, down where the light of the stars cannot reach, the water changes. It becomes heavy, thick, and cold, pressing inward with an invisible, crushing weight. Down in this quiet, lightless world, there are no waves. There is no wind. There is only an infinite, suspended stillness. And drifting softly through this heavy, black water is a shadow. It is an iron whale, a long, steel cylinder slipping blindly through the abyss. Inside the U-boat, the isolation is of a different, more profound kind. To be submerged is to be entirely disconnected from the earth. There are no portholes to look out of, no fresh breezes to breathe, no horizon to gauge the passing of the days. The men inside are blind, sealed in a fragile metal bubble, trusting their lives to the gentle hum of gyroscopes and the slow, sweeping needles of the depth gauges. The air inside the boat is warm and humid, heavy with the scent of diesel oil, unwashed wool, and the sharp tang of brass polish. Because they run on electric motors while beneath the surface, the boat is eerily quiet. There is no roaring engine, only a soft, high-pitched whir that sounds like the spinning of a delicate music box. Water drips slowly from the curved ceiling, condensation gathered from the breath of 50 men, falling with a soft plink, plink, plink onto the metal floor plates. In a tiny, curtained-off corner of the control room sits a young boy with heavy headphones clamped over his ears. He is the sound operator, the ears of the boat in a sightless world. He sits with his eyes closed, his face bathed in the dim, red glow of a single overhead bulb. He is a boy from a landlocked farm, a boy who grew up listening to the rustle of wheat fields and the gentle lowing of cattle. Now, he listens to the most intimate whispers of the sea. He turns a polished metal wheel with slow, agonizing care, sweeping his hydrophones through the dark water. Through the headphones, he hears the true voice of the Atlantic. It is not silent down here. He hears the soft, crackling sound of a million tiny shrimp, like rain falling on a tin roof. He hears the strange, groaning shifts of cold currents meeting warm ones. And sometimes, if he is very still, he hears the distant, mournful, singing cries of the great whales calling out to one another across the void. He sits in his small chair, entirely enveloped in the sounds of the deep, feeling a loneliness so vast it makes his chest ache. He reaches into the pocket of his damp shirt and his fingers brush against a small, dried wildflower. He picked it from the side of a dirt road on his last day of leave, pressing it between the pages of a mechanical manual. He rubs the fragile, dry petals between his thumb and forefinger. It is his tether to the sun. It is a tiny, quiet reminder that there is a world above the water, a world of color and light and soft grass. In this moment, suspended in the dark, the young submariner and the young merchant sailor on the surface are not so different. They are both boys wrapped in heavy coats, surrounded by the terrifying majesty of the Atlantic. They are both profoundly alone, relying on the quiet companionship of the men beside them and the letters hidden in their pockets to keep the creeping dark at bay. They are both far from home, floating in a vast, indifferent cradle that rocks them with the same slow, eternal rhythm. The ocean does not care about the flags painted on the sides of the ships, or the different languages spoken in the cramped, steel corridors. It does not know about the war. It only knows the pull of the tides, the freezing touch of the Arctic ice, and the deep, silent currents that sweep across the abyssal plains. It holds the merchant ship on its surface, and it holds the submarine in its depths, wrapping them both in a vast, watery embrace. As the long night stretches on, a deep, collective sleep settles over the men on the water. On the freighter, sailors lie in their bunks, swaying gently as the ship climbs and falls over the swells. In the submarine, men sleep strapped into narrow cots, lulled by the soft, electric hum of their slow progression through the dark. They dream of simple things. They dream of a mother's warm hand, the smell of baking bread, the sound of a dog barking in a sunlit yard. They dream of a quiet morning where the only water they see is a gentle river winding through a green valley. Above them, the stars slowly wheel across the black sky, indifferent and beautiful. Below them, the unseen depths stretch down into eternal night. And all around them, the great Atlantic breathes. It rises and falls, a gentle, soothing lullaby for the isolated souls drifting through the void. It is a slow, rhythmic song of water and time, carrying the fragile, beautiful light of human resilience safely through the darkest, most lonely stretches of the night. To seek out another soul in the middle of a black and endless sea is the oldest and most quiet of human instincts. When you are suspended entirely in the dark, wrapped in a fragile shell of iron with the crushing weight of the ocean pressing gently against all sides, the universe shrinks. It becomes no larger than the curved, damp walls of the hull. For the men living inside these submerged tubes, weeks would pass without a single glimpse of the sun. They lived in an eternal, artificial twilight, a world measured only by the slow ticking of a clock and the rhythmic, comforting thrum of the electric motors pushing them softly through the abyss. In the beginning, they sailed entirely alone. A single boat would slip out of a misty harbor and vanish into the great expanse, a solitary needle dropped into an unfathomable blue haystack. The isolation was absolute. It was a heavy, quiet companion that sat beside them at the tiny galley table and stood next to them during the long, silent watches of the night. But humans were never meant to carry such profound loneliness for long. And so, out of this deep, aching need for connection in the void, a new kind of gathering was born. They would eventually be called packs, a word that conjures images of fierce, coordinated hunters roaming the wild. But out here, beneath the pale, scattered dust of the Milky Way, they were not apex predators. They were simply lonely men, huddled together in the deep, reaching out across the miles just to feel a little less alone. Imagine the cramped, dimly lit radio corner of one of these boats. It is barely larger than a closet, tucked away near the control room. The air here is incredibly stale, heavy with the scent of hot radio tubes, damp wool sweaters, and the faint, sweet smell of machine oil. Sitting on a small stool is the radio man. He is young, his eyes ringed with the dark shadows of exhaustion, his ears clamped tight beneath a pair of heavy leather headphones. He leans forward, bathed in the soft, amber glow of the instrument dials. His hand rests gently on a small, brass telegraph key. With a slow, deliberate pressure, he begins to tap. Click, 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 click. It is a delicate, whispered pulse of electricity sent up through a slender wire to the surface, where it jumps off the antenna and ripples out into the cold, night air. It is invisible. It makes no sound that the fish or the gulls can hear. But it travels for miles across the black, rolling swells of the Atlantic. It is a question tossed into the infinite dark. I am here. Is anyone else out there? Miles away, in another iron tube entirely swallowed by the sea, another young boy sits in a nearly identical, dimly lit corner. He has been listening to nothing but the hiss of static and the ghostly, atmospheric crackles of the ocean for hours. His eyelids are heavy. He is dreaming of his mother's kitchen, of the way the morning light would catch the dust motes dancing over the wooden table. Suddenly, through the hiss of the static, he hears it. A faint, rhythmic chirp. It is so small, so fragile, but it is undeniably human. He sits up straight, his breath catching in his throat, and he reaches out to tune the dial, sharpening the sound until the gentle tapping fills his headphones. He grabs his own brass key and answers. Yes, he taps back into the void. I am here, too. You are not alone. This was the true formation of the Wolfpacks. It was not a gathering of monsters, but the weaving of an invisible, fragile web of Morse code across the vastness of the water. It was the deep comfort of knowing that somewhere, just over the curve of the earth, another group of tired, homesick men was drifting through the exact same darkness. When the night was at its deepest, and the ocean was calm, the boats would slowly rise to the surface to breathe. The heavy iron hatches would be unsealed with a dull, metallic clank, and the men would take turns standing on the bridge, letting the pure, freezing ocean air wash over their pale faces. After days submerged, the first breath of fresh air is an intoxicating, overwhelming thing. It smells fiercely of salt, of wet wind, and of the wide, open sky. The men stand shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in heavy, rubberized coats, their breath pluming in small white clouds against the cold. They look up at the stars, letting the sheer beauty of the cosmos wash away the claustrophobia of the hull beneath their feet. And as they look out across the dark, glassy water, they see them. Just shadows beneath the starlight. A mile to the port, the low, black silhouette of a conning tower rising silently over a swell. 2 miles to the starboard, another. They do not signal with bright lights. They do not shout across the water. They simply drift together, a quiet communion of iron and souls. To see those distant silhouettes was to feel a profound, silent brotherhood. The commander on the bridge lowers his binoculars, a soft, weary smile touching the corners of his mouth. He knows the man standing on the bridge of the distant boat. They had shared a final, quiet drink in a smoky tavern back in France, talking about their gardens and the wives waiting for them at home. Now, they are here, suspended together at the end of the world. They cannot speak, but their presence is a warm, protective blanket against the chilling indifference of the ocean. Beneath the surface of this quiet gathering, life inside the boats continued its slow, enduring rhythm. The air they shared in the depths was a tangible thing, growing heavier and more sour with every passing hour they spent submerged. It tasted of old copper and unwashed bodies. To conserve oxygen, the men were ordered to lie completely still in their narrow, canvas bunks. The interior of the boat becomes a softly breathing dormitory. It is a gallery of quiet, personal resilience. In one bunk, a mechanic lies on his back, staring at the curved ceiling just inches above his nose. He has a small, worn photograph of a little girl with missing front teeth tucked into the webbing of his hammock. He stares at it until the dim light blurs, holding the image in his mind like a talisman against the crushing dark. Across the narrow aisle, the ship's cook moves slowly, almost soundlessly. He carries a small tin of lemon drops, a rare and precious luxury. He stops by the bunk of a young sailor, a boy who had been weeping softly into his rough woolen blanket just the night before, overwhelmed by the sheer, heavy silence of the deep. The cook gently touches the boy's shoulder and presses a single, yellow lemon drop into his palm. He doesn't say a word. He just gives the boy's shoulder a reassuring squeeze and moves on. As the hard, sweet candy dissolves on the boy's tongue, the bright, citrus flavor cuts through the taste of the diesel and the stale air. It tastes vividly of the sun. It tastes of summer afternoons and solid ground. He closes his eyes, letting the small act of kindness anchor him, finding the strength to endure just one more hour, one more day, in the belly of the whale. When the pack moved, they moved as a slow, drifting cloud of shadows. They were tracking the faint, distant smudges of smoke on the horizon, the merchant convoys. But even this pursuit was wrapped in a heavy, reluctant sorrow. The men in the U-boats knew exactly who was on those distant freighters. They knew they were hunting men just like themselves, fathers, brothers, boys who wrote letters home by the dim light of a swaying lantern, boys who carried lucky stones in their pockets and dreamed of quiet hearths. There was no joy in the approach. As the invisible net closed around the convoy, a deep, heavy silence would fall over the control room of the submarine. The men moved like ghosts, whispering their reports, their faces pale in the red light. They were trapped in a tragic, quiet dance, two groups of ordinary, exhausted men pushed together by a war that felt incredibly distant from the peaceful, starlit beauty of the open ocean. The commander peering through the periscope does not feel like a conqueror. He feels the immense, tragic weight of the water and the fragile nature of the lives floating upon it. He watches the silhouette of a heavy freighter crossing the moonlit path, seeing not a target, but a ship full of sleeping men. He closes his eyes for a brief, private second, sending a silent, wordless apology out into the dark, before turning back to the heavy burden of his duty. Eventually, the sky in the east begins to soften, turning from pitch black to a bruised, melancholic purple. The stars begin to fade one by one, retreating from the approaching dawn. The night, which had offered them the safety of darkness and the comforting sight of their silent companions, is ending. The order is given, whispered gently down the length of the metal tube. Flood the tanks. On the surface, the water begins to churn. The heavy iron vents open with a slow, drawn-out sigh, like a great beast exhaling its final breath. The ocean rushes in to embrace the boats, pulling them softly down. The men on the bridge take one last, long look at the fading stars, at the distant silhouettes of their brothers, before descending the ladder and pulling the heavy hatch shut, sealing themselves away from the light. As the water closes over the periscopes, smoothing out the whitecaps until there is no trace that they were ever there, the ocean returns to its vast, unbroken solitude. The pack is gone from the surface, swallowed once again by the deep. But down below, in the eternal, heavy twilight, they are still together. They sit in the dark, breathing the stale air, listening to the soft humming of the motors and the gentle, rhythmic tapping of the Morse code traveling through the abyss. They are a collection of lonely souls, tethered to one another by invisible threads, finding quiet comfort in the shadows, waiting out the long, gentle passage of the starlit night. There is a profound and ancient comfort in a solitary light shining in the darkness, and to turn it off is to invite the vast, unknowable shadows inside. For as long as men have built boats and pushed them out into the restless tides, there have been fires kept burning on the edge of the world. The coastlines of the Atlantic were once strung with these beautiful, glowing pearls. Coastal lighthouses stood tall and proud on jagged cliffs and lonely outcrops, their great glass eyes sweeping a slow, rhythmic beam across the water. That sweeping light was the heartbeat of the shore. It was a gentle, sweeping brush of gold that painted the whitecaps, cutting through the thickest sea fog and the heaviest midnight gales. To a tired sailor clinging to a freezing wheel, that flash of light was not just a warning of rocks. It was a warm, familiar voice calling out through the storm, whispering that he was safe, that he was seen, and that he was almost home. But as the shadows deepened beneath the surface of the ocean, the nature of light began to change. The beautiful, guiding beacons that had saved countless lives suddenly became a terrible danger. A bright light shining from the shore would cast a long, brilliant path across the water, perfectly silhouetting any passing merchant ship against the glow. It turned the slow, heavy freighters into crisp, black targets for the quiet hunters waiting in the dark. And so, the heartbreaking order was given. The coastlines, the villages, and the great towers had to close their eyes. The world had to go dark. Imagine an old lighthouse keeper on the rugged coast of Cornwall or the rocky shores of Newfoundland. He is a man who has lived his entire life in the rhythm of the spinning lens. His hands are calloused, his sweaters smell of paraffin and salt, and his pocket watch is set not to the sun, but to the precise rotation of the beam. On the evening the order arrives, he climbs the winding, spiraling iron stairs of his tower. His footsteps echo softly in the hollow space, a slow, heavy climb that he has made 10,000 times before. He reaches the lantern room at the very top. It is a beautiful sanctuary of polished brass and perfectly cut prisms, smelling warmly of oil and heated metal. Through the glass walls, he looks out at the endless expanse of the Atlantic, watching the sky bruise into the deep purples and blues of twilight. He takes a clean, soft cloth and gently wipes away a smudge from the brass railing, a final, loving act of care. Then, with a heavy, trembling hand, he reaches for the switch. He hesitates. To extinguish this light feels like breaking a sacred promise to the men on the water. It goes against every instinct in his weary bones. He takes a deep, slow breath, closes his eyes, and pulls the heavy lever. The great bulb cools and fades. The intricate machinery slows its rhythmic humming, winding down into a profound, suffocating silence. The sweeping beam of gold vanishes from the water, and the ocean is instantly swallowed by an impenetrable blackness. The old keeper stands in the dark lantern room, surrounded by cold glass, feeling a terrible, hollow ache in his chest. He places his hand against the window, his palm resting against the chill of the night, and whispers a quiet, desperate prayer for the ships he can no longer guide. This fading of the beacons did not stop at the edge of the cliffs. The great, creeping shadow moved inland, rolling over the seaside towns and fishing villages like a heavy fog. These were places that had always found comfort in their own warm glows. In the evenings, the cobblestone streets were bathed in the soft, amber light of street lamps. The windows of cottages and taverns spilled squares of yellow light onto the wet pavements, inviting the weary inside for a cup of hot tea and a place by the hearth. But now, that innocent warmth was a luxury they could no longer afford. Every window, every door, every tiny gap in the wood had to be sealed. In a small, stone cottage near the harbor, a mother stands on a wooden chair, reaching up to pin thick, heavy blackout curtains across her parlor window. The fabric is rough and smells faintly of dust and dye. It is heavy, designed to swallow every single drop of light from the lamps inside. Her hands move quickly but gently, pressing thumbtacks into the wooden frame, smoothing down the edges so not even a sliver of the room's warmth can escape into the night. Her young daughter sits on the edge of the rug, watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. The world has become a very strange place. The little girl does not understand the war, or the iron whales in the deep, or the geometry of silhouettes on the water. She only knows that her beautiful, bright town has been swallowed by a monster called the Blackout. The darkness outside feels heavy, pressing against the stone walls of the cottage, making the space inside feel incredibly fragile. The mother steps down from the chair and sees the quiet fear in her daughter's face. She smiles, a soft, reassuring curve of her lips, and sits down on the rug beside her. She pulls a matchbox from her apron and strikes a single match, the sudden flare painting their faces in warm, dancing gold. She touches the flame to the wick of a small, thick candle resting in a deep saucer. "Look," the mother whispers, her voice a soothing, melodic hum. "We haven't lost the light. We are just keeping it secret for a while. It's a treasure, and we are hiding it right here, just for us." She pulls the little girl into her lap, wrapping her arms around her, and begins to tell a quiet, lilting story about a kingdom at the bottom of the sea, where the fish carry tiny lanterns and the coral glows like embers. In the center of the dark, enclosed room, that one tiny candle becomes a sun. It is a small, everyday heroism, a mother building a fortress of imagination and warmth to protect her child from the vast, frightening reality of the world outside. Yet, the psychological toll of this perpetual nighttime settled deeply into the bones of the coastal communities. The sea had always been a neighbor, sometimes fierce, sometimes gentle, but always visible. Now, without the streetlights to illuminate the surf, without the lighthouses sweeping the horizon, the ocean became an invisible, breathing void. The villagers could hear it. They could hear the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the seawall, they could smell the sharp tang of the kelp, and they could feel the damp mist on their faces when they stepped outside. But they could not see it. Walking through the town at night became an exercise in blind trust. People learned to navigate by memory and touch. They ran their fingertips lightly along the brick walls of the bakeries and the wooden fences of the boatyards. Footsteps sounded different in the pitch black, they seemed louder, hollower, echoing down the empty lanes. Neighbors would pass one another in the dark, unable to see faces, offering only a softly spoken greeting, a quiet murmur of solidarity in the void. It was a nervous, shared intimacy. They were all holding their breath together, living in a suspended state of waiting, hidden beneath a blanket of heavy, starless night. And out on the water, the men feeling their way through the dark felt the absence of the shore with a deep, physical ache. A young merchant sailor stands his watch on the bridge of a slow-moving freighter. He leans over the compass binnacle, his face lit only by the faint, eerie red glow of the instrument dials. He has crossed this stretch of water many times before. He knows that off the port bow, just beyond the horizon, lies the rugged coastline of his home. He knows exactly when the familiar, comforting flash of the headland lighthouse should paint the low-hanging clouds. He stands there for an hour, his eyes straining against the blackness, searching the empty horizon for that rhythmic heartbeat of gold. But there is nothing. Just a seamless, uninterrupted wall of dark. The absence of the light makes the ocean feel impossibly wide, and the ship impossibly small. It feels as though the land has simply ceased to exist, as if the entire world has been submerged and they are the only souls left floating in the void. He pulls his collar up against the biting wind and slips his freezing hand into his coat pocket. His fingers trace the edges of a folded piece of paper. It is a letter he wrote earlier that day, down in the swaying, humid warmth of his cabin. In the letter, addressed to his wife, he did not write about the fear of the unseen submarines, or the freezing spray of the Atlantic. He wrote about the stars. He wrote that with all the towns and lighthouses turned off, the night sky had bloomed into something magnificent. Without the interference of the electric lights of the shore, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of crushed diamonds. He wrote to her, saying, "Do not worry about the dark, my love. The beacons on the cliffs may be sleeping, but the sky has given us a million new ones to guide us home. Whenever you look up, know I am looking at the same stars, and the light is traveling between us." This was the quiet resilience of the men and women caught in the shadows. They learned that when the great, sweeping lights of the world are extinguished, the smallest flames become the most precious. The covered lantern in a ship's galley, the hidden candle in a stone cottage, the glowing tip of a shared cigarette in an alleyway, the soft red dial of a compass pointing the way forward. The fading of the beacons did not plunge the human spirit into darkness. It simply forced the light to retreat inward. The people on the shore and the men on the water held onto their warmth, protecting it behind heavy curtains and steel bulkheads, waiting patiently for the long, nervous night to end. And as the earth turned slowly in the void, the ocean continued its eternal, rhythmic breathing. The water lapped softly against the invisible coastlines, a gentle, washing sound that lulled the frightened towns and the drifting ships into a deep, quiet sleep. The lighthouses stood like silent, sleeping guardians on the cliffs, their glass eyes blind but waiting. They were resting, just as the men and women were resting, gathering their strength for the distant, beautiful dawn when the curtains would finally be pulled back, and the light would be allowed to touch the water once again. Long before the sun even thinks of rising, the air above the black water is alive with a million invisible whispers. If you could see the night sky as the radios do, the dark and empty expanse of the Atlantic would not look empty at all. It would look like a delicate, shimmering web of golden threads. These threads are the radio waves, the invisible, humming sparks that leap from the tall steel masts of lonely ships, flying unseen through the freezing air, bending gracefully over the curvature of the earth. They are the voices of isolated men, reaching out across the void, trying to find another beating heart in the dark. Deep inside a slow-moving merchant freighter, tucked away just behind the bridge, is the wireless room. It is a tiny, cramped space, no larger than a small closet. The air inside is warm and thick, smelling heavily of hot metal, melting rosin, and the sharp, distinct scent of ozone that always clings to electrical things. The walls are lined with dials, switches, and the soft, amber glow of glass vacuum tubes. These tubes radiate a gentle, comforting heat, like a tiny mechanical fireplace keeping the creeping cold of the ocean at bay. Sitting in front of this glowing wall is a young man. He wears a thick wool sweater, his shoulders hunched slightly forward, a pair of heavy, leather-bound headphones clamped tightly over his ears. His eyes are half closed, lulled into a state of deep, quiet focus by the gentle rolling of the ship and the mesmerizing hiss of static humming in his ears. To listen to the ether in the middle of the ocean is to listen to the sound of the universe itself. Mostly, it is just a rushing noise, a soft, staticky sigh that sounds exactly like the wind or the waves brushing against the hull. Sometimes, there are strange, ghostly pops and crackles caused by distant thunderstorms raging hundreds of miles away, or the mysterious shift of the northern lights dancing in the upper atmosphere. It is a lonely, cosmic symphony. But then, out of that rushing void, comes a sound that makes the young operator sit up a little straighter. It is faint. It is incredibly fragile, fading in and out with the atmospheric tides. But it is there. A rhythmic, staccato chirp. It is Morse code. It is a human hand, somewhere out there in the freezing night, pressing down on a small brass key. The boy does not know who is sending it. He does not know their name, or the color of their eyes, or what kind of ship they are sailing on. But as he quickly writes down the letters on his notepad, his pencil scratching softly in the amber light, he feels a profound, silent kinship with that distant stranger. For a few brief minutes, they are tethered together by this invisible spark. The sender is saying, simply, I am still here. We are still afloat. And by receiving it, by writing it down in the warm glow of his little cabin, the boy is saying, I hear you. You are not alone. There is a strange and beautiful intimacy to this silent conversation. The operator's hand rests near his own transmitting key, a simple piece of molded bakelite and brass. He knows that if he were to press it, he could send his own sparks flying up into the night. But strict silence is the rule of survival now. To speak is to reveal your location to the shadows beneath the waves. So, he must only listen. He must swallow his own need to reach out, and instead be the quiet, patient receiver of other men's fears and hopes. And what of those shadows? Far beneath the surface, submerged in the heavy, crushing blackness of the water, another radio room exists. It is even smaller, even more claustrophobic. The air here does not smell of ozone, but of damp wool, diesel fumes, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies breathing the same stale air for days on end. Here, too, sits a young man with headphones pressed to his ears. He is bathed in a dim, eerie red light, surrounded by the constant, dripping condensation of the iron hull. He is a young boy from a quiet village, a boy who used to listen to the birds singing in the linden trees outside his bedroom window. Now, his world is reduced to the hiss and crackle of the same invisible ether. When the boat is deep, the radio is blind. But when they creep up to the surface under the cover of darkness, raising their slender antenna just above the rolling swells to breathe the night air, the ether floods in. The young submariner hears the very same static, the very same distant storms as the boy on the merchant ship. And occasionally, he hears the same faint, fluttering chirps of Morse code. He traces the letters on his own pad. He knows these are the signals of the convoys, the routing orders of the men his commander is hunting. But in the quiet hours of the middle watch, when the boat is just drifting under the stars, the war feels very far away. He listens to the rhythm of the sender's hand. Every radio operator has a unique style, a signature rhythm they call a fist. Some are heavy and slow, tapping out the dots and dashes with a deliberate, weary caution. Others are fast and light, fluttering like a moth against a window pane, betraying the nervous energy of the young man at the key. The boy in the submarine listens to a nervous, fluttering fist and feels a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. He knows that rhythm. He knows exactly what it feels like to sit in the dark, miles from home, with a cold knot of fear in your stomach. In the vast, uncaring theater of the ocean, the ether strips away uniforms and flags. It leaves only the raw, vulnerable pulse of humanity. It leaves two boys sitting in glowing boxes, thousands of miles apart, connected by the simple, desperate desire to survive the night. Sometimes, the boy on the merchant ship uses the quiet hours to write a different kind of message. He pushes his logbook aside and pulls out a thin sheet of personal writing paper. He dips his pen into a bottle of ink that swings gently in a wooden gimbal. He cannot send this message through the radio. It must travel by slower, older means. He writes to his sweetheart. He tells her about the wireless room. He tries to explain to her the magic of his job, how he can cast a net into the sky and catch voices from continents he has never seen. He writes about the sheer wonder of the invisible waves. My darling, he writes, his handwriting sloping gently across the page, tonight I heard a shore station testing their signal from a city a world away. It was so clear it sounded like they were in the next room. It made me realize that the ocean is not so impossibly huge after all. If a delicate little spark can cross the entire world in a fraction of a second, then surely my love can cross it just as fast. Whenever you hear the static on the wireless set in the parlor, think of me. That is the ocean whispering that I am out here, and that I am on my way back to you. He folds the letter carefully, smoothing the crease with his thumb, and tucks it into his breast pocket. Just writing it has eased the tightness in his chest. It is a small, private anchor dropped into the deep. This is the quiet heroism of the radio operators. They are the keepers of the invisible threads. While the rest of the crew sleeps, resting their tired bodies in swaying bunks, the operators stay awake, staring into the amber dials. They are the ears of the ship, the delicate sensory organs of a massive, blind vessel. They bear the psychological weight of listening for distress calls. There is nothing more chilling than the frantic, broken signals of a ship in trouble, the staccato plea for help that abruptly cuts to static, leaving a heavy, haunting silence in its wake. When a distress call comes in, the operator's blood runs cold. The static suddenly parts, and a desperate voice in the form of dots and dashes fills the headphones. It is a terrifying intimacy. The operator sits in his warm, safe room, listening to the final moments of a vessel struggling in the freezing dark just over the horizon. He writes down the coordinates with a trembling hand, tears welling in his eyes. He cannot reach through the ether to pull those men from the water. He can only record their final whisper, ensuring that they do not vanish into the void entirely unnoticed. He acts as a witness to their struggle, a gentle custodian of their last earthly transmission. It is a heavy burden for a young heart to carry, but he carries it with quiet, unwavering grace. As the long night slowly gives way to the first pale bruises of dawn, the atmosphere begins to change. The radio waves behave differently as the sun begins to warm the upper edges of the sky. The distant signals fade away, swallowed by the rising static of the day. The young operator on the merchant ship reaches up and clicks off the main receiver. The sudden silence in the tiny cabin is deafening, ringing slightly in the enclosed space. He pulls the heavy headphones from his aching ears, rubbing the deep red creases they have left in his skin. He stretches his tired arms, yawns softly, and looks out the small, reinforced window. The ocean is turning from black to a deep, melancholic gray. He turns off the glowing vacuum tubes. The amber light slowly fades, and the glass begins to cool with a soft, ticking sound. He gathers his logbook and steps out onto the deck. The cold morning air hits his face, smelling of salt and wet iron. He takes a deep, cleansing breath. The shift is over. He has kept the vigil. He has tended to the invisible sparks in the cold dark, gathering the whispers of the world and holding them safely in the night. Now, he will go down to his narrow bunk, pull the woolen blanket up to his chin, and close his eyes. And as he drifts into a deep, peaceful sleep, rocked by the slow, eternal rhythm of the Atlantic, the invisible threads of the ether will continue to dance and weave in the sky above him, a silent, beautiful testament to the enduring, unbreakable connection of the human spirit. To be swallowed by the ocean is to feel the quiet, unimaginable weight of the world resting gently against your ceiling. When the heavy iron hatches are pulled shut and the long, dark shape of the vessel slips beneath the rolling waves, the entire universe undergoes a profound and sudden transformation. Up on the surface, there is the endless chaos of the wind, the biting sting of the sea spray, and the vast, dizzying expanse of the open sky. But the moment the water closes over the highest periscope, all of that ceases to exist. The roaring of the storm is instantly replaced by a deep, heavy, velvet silence. It is a silence so complete that it rings softly in the ears, a thick and muffled quiet that belongs only to the very bottom of the world. Down here, suspended in the eternal twilight of the deep water, the iron boat glides like a blind, slow-moving phantom. Because the massive, rumbling diesel engines need air to breathe, they are put to sleep. In their place, the gentle electric motors take over, emitting a soft, high-pitched purr that vibrates faintly through the floor plates. It is a soothing, continuous hum, like the spinning of a child's mechanical top, or the steady, rhythmic purring of a great, resting cat. But as the boat sinks deeper into the freezing layers of the Atlantic, the reality of the confined space begins to settle over the men inside. They are 50 souls enclosed within a slender tube of steel, no wider than a small hallway in a country house. There are no straight lines here. Everything is curved, bending inward to hold back the immense, crushing pressure of the sea outside. The walls press close, a dense labyrinth of pipes, valves, and twisting wires, leaving only a narrow, central aisle for the men to slowly squeeze past one another. To live inside this submerged shell is to accept a life entirely without privacy. Every breath, every whisper, every softly spoken dream is shared in the dimly lit dark. And yet, this extreme closeness does not breed anger or resentment. Instead, it forges a quiet, unspoken brotherhood. When you are suspended in the abyss, with the freezing ocean just an inch of steel away, the man standing next to you is no longer just a sailor. He is your keeper, your shadow, your family. As the days stretch into weeks without a single glimpse of the sun, the air inside the boat takes on a life of its own. It grows remarkably heavy, thick with a complex, unforgettable scent. It is a fragrance woven from the sharp, metallic tang of diesel oil, the sweet, earthy smell of damp wool sweaters, the fading ghost of lemon soap, and the warm, human scent of 50 men living, working, and sleeping in an enclosed space. It is not a harsh smell to them, it is the smell of home, of survival, and of each other. Because the water pressing against the outside of the hull is desperately cold, and the air trapped inside is warmed by the bodies and the slow heat of the batteries, a strange and beautiful phenomenon occurs. It begins to rain inside the boat. Condensation forms on the cold, curved ceiling, gathering into heavy, trembling drops. They cling to the steel and the painted pipes for just a moment before letting go, falling softly into the dim light. Plink, plink, plink. It is a slow, eternal indoor shower. The men drape rough canvas towels over their bunks and over the delicate radio equipment, trying to catch the falling water. But the dampness touches everything. It softens the pages of their favorite books. It makes the leather of their boots swell and sigh. In one of the narrow sleeping quarters, tucked beneath a ceiling of twisting pipes, a young boy lies in his bunk. He is wrapped in a heavy, woolen blanket that feels forever damp to the touch. He lies perfectly still on his back, his eyes tracing the slow path of a single drop of water gathering directly above his face. He listens to the gentle creak and groan of the steel hull, the boat stretching and flexing under the immense weight of the water above them. It is a terrifying sound at first, this groaning of the iron. It sounds like the sea is trying to slowly crush them in its massive hands. The boy's breathing is shallow, his heart fluttering like a trapped bird against his ribs. The claustrophobia begins to creep in, a heavy, suffocating feeling that the walls are slowly moving closer, trying to steal his breath. But then, a shadow blocks the dim amber light of the aisle. It is the ship's cook, an older man with a face lined by years of wind and sun, moving with the quiet, balanced grace of a veteran sailor. The cook sees the young boy's wide, frightened eyes. He does not say a word, for words are heavy, clumsy things in the deep. Instead, he simply reaches out with a dry, worn cloth and gently wipes away a bead of icy condensation from the boy's forehead. The older man offers a small, warm smile, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the golden light. He reaches into the pocket of his faded apron and pulls out a tiny, hard piece of dried apple, saved from a rationing tin. He presses it gently into the boy's palm, wrapping the boy's cold fingers around it. The touch of the older man's hand is incredibly grounding. It breaks the spell of the creeping panic. The boy places the dried fruit on his tongue, the sharp, sweet taste of the orchard instantly transporting him away from the cold steel and back to the sunlit fields of his childhood. He closes his eyes, his breathing slowing, matching the slow, gentle hum of the electric motors. The cook gives his shoulder one last, reassuring squeeze and vanishes back into the shadows. It is an everyday heroism, an invisible act of profound kindness that saves a mind from the dark. Time, in this submerged world, loses its sharp edges. There is no dawn to wake them, no twilight to signal the end of the day. The only sun they have is the soft, reddish-amber glow of the low-wattage bulbs running along the ceiling. They live in a perpetual, dreaming midnight. They measure their lives not in hours, but in watches, trading places in a slow, tired dance. Because space is so incredibly scarce, they must share their beds. As one man is quietly roused from his sleep to take his place at the engine controls or the periscope, another weary man slips silently into the very same bunk. They call them warm bunks. The mattress never has time to lose the heat of the human body. To slide into a warm bunk after hours of standing in the damp, freezing air of the control room is a deeply comforting feeling. It is like being held. It is the lingering warmth of a brother who has kept the space safe for you while you were awake, a silent transfer of rest and responsibility. Down at the very end of the boat, sitting cross-legged on a wooden crate near the quiet hum of the torpedo tubes, another sailor is engaged in a fragile, private ritual. He holds a small, leather-bound notebook balanced on his knee. A tiny, caged light bulb swings gently above his head as the boat adjusts its trim, casting long, swaying shadows across the curved walls. He is writing a letter. The paper is incredibly soft from the humidity, and the ink from his fountain pen spreads slightly, blurring the edges of his words. He writes slowly, taking immense care with each looping letter. He does not write about the smell of the diesel, or the indoor rain, or the immense, terrifying weight of the water pressing against the hull. He knows that his mother, sitting by her hearth in a quiet village miles away, would only worry. Instead, he creates a beautiful, sunlit lie. He tells her that the ocean is calm and friendly. He writes about a pod of dolphins that followed them for miles, leaping joyfully through the silver foam. He promises her that when he finally returns, he will help her plant the tulips along the front walk, and that he will never complain about the summer heat again. As he writes, a single drop of condensation falls from a pipe overhead, landing perfectly in the center of the page, washing away the tail of a word. He smiles softly, gently blowing on the damp spot to dry it. It is a piece of the ocean mixing with his love, a quiet, watery seal upon his promise to come home. This is how they survive the abyss. They do not fight the dark, they simply build tiny, glowing fires of humanity within it. They play endless, silent games of cards on upside-down ammunition boxes, communicating entirely through raised eyebrows and soft, muffled chuckles. They share dog-eared paperback novels, passing them from bunk to bunk until the covers fall away and the pages are translucent with engine grease. They share their rations, breaking a single piece of stale chocolate into 3 tiny fragments, savoring the sweetness as if it were a grand feast. They are tethered together by the simple, beautiful fact that they are breathing the exact same air. The oxygen grows thinner and more sour the longer they remain submerged, a heavy, drowsy weight that settles behind their eyes. Every breath taken is a breath borrowed from the man sleeping above you. It is the ultimate expression of trust. They are resting in the belly of an iron whale, completely reliant on the quiet competence of their friends, trusting that the machinists will keep the motors turning, trusting that the navigators will find the way, trusting that the steel will hold against the dark. As the long, timeless night stretches on, a deep peace settles over the submerged boat. The murmurs fade into a soft, collective rhythm of breathing. The electric motors purr their endless lullaby, pushing the slender vessel blindly through the freezing depths. Outside, the Atlantic is impossibly vast and unfathomably deep. Millions of tons of water press against the small iron bubble, a terrifying, silent force. But inside, there is only the warm, amber light, the gentle dripping of the indoor rain, and the quiet resilience of ordinary men sleeping shoulder to shoulder. They are suspended in the dark, rocked gently by unseen currents, floating peacefully through the lonely void. The ocean embraces them in its heavy, watery arms, holding them safely in the cradle of the deep as they drift slowly and softly through the long, quiet slumber of the deep. There is a specific kind of quiet that only arrives when the sky decides to gently blanket the endless ocean in pure, drifting white. For months, the Atlantic has been a place of sharp edges and biting winds. In the deep heart of winter, the sea is usually a restless, churning expanse of gray and black, tossing the heavy ships like wooden toys. The men who sail upon it are wrapped in thick, coarse wool and stiff rubber, their faces raw from the freezing, horizontal spray. They live in a state of perpetual exhaustion, their bodies constantly bracing against the violent roll of the deck, their eyes straining against the unrelenting dark. The winter ocean is a heavy burden, a cold and indifferent giant that demands every ounce of their weary strength. But tonight, the giant has fallen into a deep and peaceful sleep. Sometime just after midnight, the howling wind simply gives up. It drops away to nothing, leaving behind an atmosphere of profound and startling stillness. The towering, angry waves slowly settle down, smoothing out into long, glassy swells that roll beneath the ships with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The air grows incredibly still and cold, but it is no longer the bitter, stinging cold of the gale. It is a crisp, fragile cold. It smells clean, like a frozen meadow, carrying the faint, sweet promise of snow. And then, out of the heavy, bruised purple clouds above, the first flakes begin to fall. They do not blow sideways. They do not sting the skin. Because there is no wind, they fall perfectly straight down, drifting at a slow, leisurely pace, as if they have all the time in the world. They are huge, feathery clusters of frost, delicate and impossibly light. They descend from the dark heavens in complete silence, a million tiny, glowing embers of white falling against the vast black canvas of the night. On the open deck of a lonely merchant freighter, a young sailor stands his watch. He has been shivering for hours, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his heavy coat, his chin tucked down against his chest to guard against the chill. He is so tired that his eyes burn, and his mind has been wandering back to the warm, glowing hearth of his childhood home. Suddenly, he feels a soft, weightless kiss against his cheek. He blinks, looking up from the dark water. A snowflake lands gently on his eyelashes, melting instantly into a cool, clean drop of water. He slowly pulls his hands from his pockets and holds them out, palms turned up toward the sky. He watches as the intricate, perfect stars of ice land on his rough woolen mittens, resting there for just a second before fading away. He looks around him, and the breath catches in his throat. The old, rusting workhorse of a ship is being transformed before his very eyes. The ugly, chipped paint of the bulkheads, the heavy iron winches, the rough canvas tarpaulins, everything is being dusted with a layer of pure, sparkling white. The sharp, intimidating lines of the vessel are softening, rounded out by the gentle accumulation of the snow. The ship no longer looks like a weary machine of war, it looks like a phantom carved from sugar and lace, drifting silently through a fairy tale. Further down the deck, the older boatswain steps out from the shadows. He is carrying a steaming tin thermos of tea, meant to warm their frozen bones. But as he steps into the open air, he stops in his tracks. The two men, separated by decades of age and a lifetime of experience, stand together in the dark, looking up at the falling snow. They do not speak. They do not need to. In this rare, suspended moment, the heavy mantle of their duty simply slips from their shoulders. The older man pours a cup of the hot tea, the steam curling up to meet the falling flakes, and passes it to the boy. The young sailor wraps his cold fingers around the warm tin, taking a slow sip. He smiles, a genuine, relaxed smile that reaches all the way to his tired eyes. For a few precious minutes, he is not a sailor on a dangerous sea. He is just a boy standing in his backyard on the first morning of winter, waiting for his friends to come out with their sleds. And miles away, hidden deep beneath that very same glassy surface, an iron whale is slowly making its way through the black water. The air inside the submerged U-boat is thick and oppressive, smelling of old copper, hot oil, and the sour breath of 50 exhausted men. They have been running deep for days, blind and suffocating, feeling the terrifying weight of the ocean pressing in on all sides. The men are pale, their eyes sunken, their spirits pulled taut by the relentless tension of the deep. The quiet order is given to rise. The ballast tanks are blown, releasing a gentle rush of compressed air, and the long, dark shape of the submarine slowly breaks the surface of the Atlantic. In the dimly lit control room, the young men of the bridge watch zip up their heavy waterproof jackets, preparing themselves for the brutal reality of the winter sea. They expect the hatch to fly open and admit a roaring wave of freezing salt spray and deafening wind. They expect to be drenched and freezing the moment they step outside. The heavy locking wheel is turned. The iron hatch is pushed open. But there is no roar. There is only a profound, echoing silence. One by one, they climb the narrow metal ladder and step out onto the small, exposed bridge. As they emerge from the claustrophobic belly of the boat, they are greeted not by the angry ocean, but by a gentle, falling curtain of white. The snow is falling so thickly now that it completely obscures the horizon. It encloses the submarine in a private, silent globe of white. The men stand perfectly still, gripping the wet metal rails, their faces turned upward. The snow lands on the rubber shoulders of their coats, gathering in the creases of their collars. It dusts the cold, steel casing of the deck, covering the terrible machinery of the boat in a soft, innocent blanket. The commander of the boat steps up to the bridge. He is a man who carries the lives of his crew on his back every single second of the day. His face is usually set in lines of grim, unwavering focus. But as he steps into the falling snow, those lines soften. He reaches up and pushes his heavy woolen cap back from his forehead, letting the cool flakes land on his skin. He lets out a long, shuddering breath, a cloud of white mist that mingles with the snow. In the absolute quiet of this winter night, the war simply ceases to exist. There are no convoys to hunt. There are no shadows to fear. There is only the vast, majestic beauty of the natural world, granting them a fleeting, miraculous moment of peace. He looks at the young lookouts standing beside him. They are holding out their hands, catching the snowflakes, pointing at the largest ones with the hushed, reverent wonder of children. The commander smiles. He closes his eyes and listens. He can actually hear the snow hitting the surface of the ocean, a sound like a million tiny whispers, a soft, effervescent fizz as the ice meets the salt water and dissolves into the dark. It is the most soothing sound he has ever heard. Down below, inside the warm, softly glowing hull of the submarine, the men off watch do not know it is snowing. But they can feel the change in the boat. They can feel the utter stillness of the water, the lack of rolling and pitching. Sitting cross-legged on a canvas bunk, a young mechanic has opened his small, battered journal. He is a boy who finds comfort in words, tracing them carefully onto the page by the light of a single, swaying bulb. Just then, one of the lookouts climbs down the ladder from the bridge. His cheeks are flushed, his eyes bright, and his dark wool sweater is covered in melting droplets of fresh, sweet water. He looks at the men in the compartment and whispers, "It's snowing." The whole ocean is turning white. The young mechanic looks down at his journal. He dips his pen into the inkwell and begins to write to his little sister, far away in a city of stone and brick. "My dearest little bird," he writes, his handwriting sloping gracefully across the page. "Tonight, a wonderful magic has happened. The sky has opened up, and it is snowing on the sea. I know you think of the ocean as a dark and scary place, but you should see it now. The water is as smooth as glass, and the snowflakes are as big as feathers. Our boat is wearing a thick, white coat, just like the one you wear when we go ice skating on the pond. It is so quiet out here, so very peaceful. When you look out your window at the snow falling on the street lamps, I want you to know that the exact same snow is falling on my shoulders. It means that we are sitting under the very same blanket, and that I am completely safe, wrapped in the quiet of the winter. He carefully closes the journal, holding that beautiful image in his mind. The thought of the snow falling softly over the steel hull above him brings a deep, comforting warmth to his chest. He pulls his rough blanket up to his chin and closes his eyes, sinking into a restful sleep that has eluded him for weeks. Above them, the snow continues to fall. It falls on the rusted decks of the merchant ships, covering the crates and the canvas in pure, sparkling frost. It falls on the slender, dark shapes of the submarines, turning them into white, drifting ghosts. It falls on the vast, empty stretches of the water, dissolving into the deep with a gentle sigh. It is a great, unifying equalizer. For this one, midnight hour, there are no sides. There are no hunters and no hunted. There are only tired men, floating on a quiet ocean, sharing the simple, profound beauty of a winter snowfall. The air is hushed. The world is soft. The ocean breathes its slow, rhythmic breath, rocking the snow-covered ships under a starless, gentle sky. And as the white flakes drift down through the dark, they bring with them a fleeting, perfect peace, washing away the fear and the exhaustion, and leaving behind only the quiet resilience of the human heart resting in the cold, beautiful night. To hold the life of a stranger in the palm of your hand, you do not need to be anywhere near the water. Sometimes, you only need a sharpened pencil and a quiet room. Miles and miles away from the freezing spray and the towering waves, entirely hidden within the rolling, gentle embrace of the countryside, there is a different kind of ocean. It is an ocean of paper, of softly glowing desk lamps, and of weary, brilliant minds working in the deep hours of the night. Here, far from the sound of the churning tides, the war is not fought with iron ships or heavy coats. It is fought with patience, with graphite, and with the quiet, rhythmic clicking of keys. Imagine a sprawling country estate, its grand brick manor house surrounded by simple, hastily built wooden huts. The night has settled heavily over the manicured lawns and the old, twisting oak trees. The windows of these huts are covered completely by thick, heavy blackout curtains, ensuring that not a single sliver of light escapes into the dark, sleeping world outside. But inside, it is a hive of hushed, breathless activity. The air in these long rooms is incredibly warm and thick. It smells of melting wax, of roasted tea leaves steeping in chipped ceramic mugs, of lingering pipe tobacco, and the distinct, dusty scent of thousands of pages of paper. It is a comforting, studious smell, reminiscent of a grand old library long after the doors have been locked to the public. The people sitting at these rows of wooden desks are not hardened sailors. They are young women in soft woolen cardigans, their hair pinned up neatly to keep it out of their eyes. They are quiet mathematicians, crossword puzzle enthusiasts, and chess players who used to spend their evenings sitting by the fire. Now, they sit shoulder to shoulder in the stifling warmth, their heads bowed over endless strings of scrambled letters, rubbing their tired eyes beneath the golden circles of light cast by their lamps. The room hums with a soothing, mechanical heartbeat. In the background, large, intricate machines filled with spinning dials and thousands of colorful wires click and whir. It is a mesmerizing sound, a rhythmic tick-tick-tick that sounds like a room full of gentle grandfather clocks all working together in perfect, synchronized harmony. This soft ticking is the sound of minds trying to untangle the most complex puzzle in the world. They are hunting the enigma. It is a mechanical labyrinth, a puzzle box with millions upon millions of invisible doors, changing its locks every single midnight. The letters they receive from the radio operators on the coast look like absolute nonsense. They are just random blocks of characters, a jumbled alphabet that holds the deepest, darkest secrets of the sea. At a small desk in the corner of the room, a young woman leans forward, resting her chin in her hand. Her fingers are permanently stained with the faint, silvery smudge of pencil lead. She has been staring at a single sheet of paper for 3 hours. The letters blur and swim before her exhausted eyes. She takes a slow, deep breath, sipping from a cup of tea that went cold an hour ago. She does not mind the cold tea. It is something real, something simple and grounding in a world of complex illusions. She closes her eyes for a moment, listening to the rain begin to fall softly against the wooden roof of the hut. It is a gentle, pattering sound. As she listens to the rain, her mind drifts away from the stifling room, traveling across the invisible ether, all the way out to the dark, freezing waters of the Atlantic. She knows exactly what she is looking at. These scrambled letters are not just a math problem. They are the whispered voices of the iron whales. They are the coordinates of the Wolfpacks gathering in the deep, and the fragile paths of the merchant ships sailing blindly toward them. When she looks at the paper, she doesn't just see ink. She sees the young boy on the freighter, shivering in his coat, writing a letter to his mother by the light of a swaying bulb. She sees the tired captain pacing the bridge, holding his breath as his ship crawls through the shadows. She feels the immense, terrifying weight of the water. This is the invisible thread. It stretches from the cold, wet deck of a ship thousands of miles away, through the stormy night sky, down the wires of a radio antenna, and right to the tip of her pencil. She holds the end of that thread in her ink-stained fingers, and she knows that if she pulls it gently, she might just be able to guide them home. She opens her eyes and picks up her pencil once more. She works softly, her eraser brushing away mistakes with a quiet, sweeping sound. She tries a new combination, shifting a dial on her cardboard wheel, coaxing the letters to align. And then, in the quietest, most unremarkable moment, the labyrinth opens. The gibberish suddenly falls away, revealing a perfect, terrifyingly clear sentence. A latitude. A longitude. A bearing. The shadow has revealed its hiding place. She does not shout. She does not cheer. There is no triumph in this discovery, only a profound, heavy sense of relief. She lets out a long, trembling exhale, the breath fluttering the edge of the paper on her desk. A small, quiet tear escapes her eye, tracing a warm path down her cheek, fueled by pure, overwhelming exhaustion and a beautiful, sudden spark of hope. She quickly transcribes the message onto a clean sheet of paper, her handwriting neat and deliberate. She places it into a small wooden tray, where it is quietly whisked away by another worker, stepping softly across the floorboards. In a few hours, a radio operator on a distant coast will tap out a new message. It will fly across the ether, reaching the tired men on the merchant ship. They will not know how the message came to be. They will never know the name of the young woman in the cardigan, or the smell of the pipe tobacco in the warm wooden hut. They will simply receive a quiet order to turn the wheel of their ship a few degrees to the south. The heavy freighter will slowly lean into the turn, charting a new path through the dark water. The sailors will look out at the empty, starlit ocean and wonder why they have changed course. They will sail right past the waiting shadows, completely unaware of the danger that was waiting for them in the deep. They will live to see the dawn, wrapped in an invisible blanket of safety woven by strangers in a landlocked room. As the long night finally begins to loosen its grip on the world, the shift inside the hut comes to an end. The young woman packs away her pencils, aligning them perfectly next to her notebook. She pushes her chair back, the wood scraping softly against the floor, and stretches her aching shoulders. She walks out of the hut and steps into the cool, damp air of the English morning. The sky is a pale, bruised blue, softening into a beautiful, milky gray. The rain has stopped, leaving the grass heavy with sparkling dew. A thick, white mist hangs low over the rolling hills, making the world look incredibly peaceful and still. Somewhere in the distance, a single bird begins to sing a sweet, simple melody, welcoming the light. She wraps her coat tightly around her, feeling the cold air kiss her tired face. She retrieves her bicycle from the wooden rack, the tires crunching softly on the gravel path. As she pedals down the quiet country lane, bordered by tall hedges and sleeping farmhouses, she feels a deep, quiet resilience settling into her bones. The war is vast and terrifying. The ocean is deep and indifferent. But in the quiet hours of the night, ordinary minds are untangling the dark. They are sitting in smoke-filled rooms, drinking cold tea, and holding the fragile lives of thousands of men in their careful hands. They are the silent guardians of the deep, working in the shadows so that others might walk in the light. She pedals her bicycle toward her small, rented room, where a warm bed and a soft pillow are waiting for her. She knows that tonight, she will return to the wooden hut. She will sit beneath the amber glow of the lamp, pick up her pencil, and begin to untangle the invisible thread all over again. And out there, on the vast and beautiful Atlantic, the great ships sail on. They ride the long, rhythmic swells of the ocean, moving slowly and safely through the morning mist, watched over by the quietest, most gentle heroes the world has ever known. They are connected by a bond that transcends the miles, a delicate web of graphite, patience, and love, holding them safe in the vast and lonely cradle of the sea. As the sun finally rises, painting the water in strokes of gold and pink, the world breathes a soft, collective sigh, resting peacefully in the promise of a new, unbroken day. To watch over a sleeping flock in the dead of winter is to give away your own warmth so that others might rest safely in the dark. Far out on the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic, beneath a sky completely devoid of stars, the ocean moves in heavy, rolling mountains of black water. In the center of this immense emptiness, a quiet gathering of shadows pushes slowly through the night. These are the merchant ships, the faithful, rust-streaked workhorses of the sea. They sail close together, a huddled mass of heavy steel and canvas, their bellies full of grain and cotton and letters from home. They are slow, and they are vulnerable, moving with a deep, swaying lumber. And like any flock moving through a dark and lonely valley, they are not alone. Out on the very edges of this floating gathering, tracing the invisible fences of the perimeter, are the shepherds. These are the small, nimble escort ships. They do not have the comforting, heavy mass of the freighters. They are frail things of thin steel, built to be fast and restless. Because they are so small, the ocean does not gently rock them, it tosses them. They pitch and roll violently with every passing wave, shuddering as their bows crash into the freezing swells, throwing vast sheets of white, icy spray up into the freezing air. To live on one of these little ships is to live in a world that never, ever stops moving. Out on the open wing of the bridge, a young sailor stands his watch. The cold out here is not just a temperature, it is a physical presence, a heavy, living thing that tries to pry its way beneath his collar and down into his bones. He is wrapped in layers of rough wool, a thick sweater knitted by his aunt, a heavy coat, a scarf pulled up over his nose and mouth, but still, he shivers. The sea spray has frozen onto his clothes, turning his dark coat white with a stiff armor of salt and rime. He grips the iron railing in front of him. The metal is encased in a smooth, thick layer of ice. Even through his heavy canvas mittens, he can feel the biting, absolute chill of it. He holds on tightly, letting his knees bend and flex, absorbing the violent, throwing motion of the deck beneath his boots. His eyes, red and burning from the relentless wind, never stop moving. He stares out into the absolute blackness, looking away from the comforting bulk of the merchant ships and out into the empty void, searching for the slightest break in the water, the faintest silhouette of a shadow creeping up from the deep. He is exhausted. It is an exhaustion so profound that it aches in his very teeth. He has not slept in a proper, dry bed for weeks. His body runs on a fragile mixture of adrenaline, lukewarm tea, and a deep, overwhelming sense of duty. When he looks back over his shoulder at the dark shapes of the freighters, a profound, almost tender protectiveness washes over him. He knows those ships are filled with ordinary men. He knows that deep inside those heavy iron hulls, older men are playing quiet games of cards, and young boys are sleeping in their hammocks, dreaming of green fields and quiet streets. They are unarmed. They are blindly trusting the men on the outside edge to keep the wolves at bay. The young shepherd on the icy deck feels the weight of all those sleeping souls pressing gently against his heart. He swallows his own fear, blinking the freezing spray from his eyelashes, and turns his face back to the wind. He will stand in the cold, and he will keep his eyes open, so that they do not have to. Down below the waterline of the little escort ship, life is a delicate, bruising balancing act. The living quarters are incredibly cramped, the air thick with the smell of damp wool, fuel oil, and the sour scent of unwashed exhaustion. As the ship rolls violently from side to side, everything that is not bolted down clatters and swings. In the tiny, sweltering galley, the ship's cook is performing a quiet miracle of everyday heroism. The stove is mounted on heavy iron gimbals, swinging wildly to stay level as the ship pitches beneath it. The cook stands with his feet planted wide apart, bracing his hip against a metal counter. He is an older man, his face lined with deep creases, his hair thinning. He is trying to heat a large metal pot of soup. It is a simple broth, made from dried vegetables and salted meat, but out here, in the middle of a freezing nowhere, it is more precious than gold. He watches the broth carefully, stirring it with a long wooden spoon, predicting the roll of the ship so the boiling liquid does not splash over the sides. He ladles the steaming soup into heavy, chipped enamel mugs. He knows exactly how cold the boys on the upper decks are. He remembers standing those freezing watches himself, many years ago, feeling as though the wind was slowly erasing his very existence. He places 2 of the steaming mugs into a wire carrier and begins the slow, treacherous climb up the steep, swaying iron ladders to the bridge. When he steps out into the howling wind, the cold instantly bites at his warm face. He moves carefully along the icy deck, keeping one hand firmly on the safety line, until he reaches the young sailor on the wing. He taps the boy gently on the shoulder. The young sailor turns, his eyebrows coated in white frost. The cook simply holds out the mug. He does not speak, the wind is too loud, and words require too much effort, but his eyes are incredibly kind. The boy takes the mug with trembling hands. The heat radiating from the enamel instantly sears through his wet mittens, a beautiful, shocking warmth. He pulls down his frozen scarf and takes a slow, careful sip. The hot broth travels down his throat, spreading a glowing, life-giving ember of heat right into the center of his chest. For a brief, suspended moment, the vastness of the ocean falls away. There is only the sweet taste of the soup, the steadying presence of the older man beside him, and the quiet, profound gratitude that passes between them. It is a tiny spark of humanity glowing fiercely against the dark. The cook gives the boy a gentle, reassuring pat on a snow-covered shoulder, takes the empty wire carrier, and slowly makes his way back down into the warm belly of the ship, leaving the shepherd a little stronger, a little more tethered to the earth. When the young sailor's watch finally ends, he is relieved by another shivering figure emerging from the shadows. They exchange only a brief, quiet murmur, a passing of the invisible baton. The boy climbs down the ladder, his legs heavy and numb, moving like a sleepwalker. He finds his way to the cramped crew quarters. It is dark, lit only by a single red battle lamp that casts a warm, bloody glow over the swaying hammocks. The room is filled with the deep, rhythmic breathing of exhausted men. He strips off his frozen outer coat, the stiff fabric crackling loudly in the quiet space. He leaves his damp clothes on, knowing he might be called back to the deck at any moment, and climbs into his canvas hammock. But despite his bone-deep fatigue, sleep does not come immediately. The adrenaline of the watch is still humming in his veins. He reaches into a small canvas pouch hanging beside his head and pulls out a folded piece of paper and a stub of a pencil. He shifts his weight, finding a comfortable pocket in the swaying canvas, and begins to write by the dim red light. He is writing to his grandfather, an old man who spent his entire life tending sheep on the rolling, windswept hills of a quiet northern country. "Dear Granddad," he writes, his handwriting shaky from the cold and the pitching of the ship. "I understand your life so much better now. I am doing exactly what you did for all those years, only my meadow is black and made of water, and it never, ever stays still. He pauses, listening to the rushing of the water against the thin steel hull, just inches from his ear. It sounds like a great, endless sigh. We are guarding a flock of merchant ships. They are so big and slow, and they trust us completely to keep them safe. It is cold out here, colder than the worst winter we ever had back home. But when I stand on the edge of the dark, holding the line, I think of you walking the perimeter of the stone walls with your lantern. I think of how you told me that a good shepherd does not sleep when the wolves are near, because the flock is too precious to lose. It makes this big, terrifying ocean feel a little smaller. It makes me feel like I am just carrying on the family trade. He writes softly, the lead of his pencil dulling against the rough paper. He pours all of his quiet resilience into the letter, transforming the vast, mechanical horror of a world at war into a simple, timeless story of a boy tending his flock. It is a way of building a mental fortress against the creeping dread of the deep. He signs the letter, folds it carefully, and tucks it back into the pouch. He pulls a rough woolen blanket up to his chin. The hammock sways back and forth, a deep, pendulum swing that matches the rolling of the heavy seas. The ship groans and creaks, a wooden and iron symphony that acts as a lullaby. He closes his eyes, letting the motion cradle him, and finally, mercifully, he slips down into a deep, dreamless sleep. Hours later, the sky in the east begins to change. The impenetrable black slowly softens into a bruised, melancholic charcoal, and then into a pale, milky gray. The wind begins to drop, leaving only a gentle, freezing breeze skipping over the whitecaps. As the new day gently touches the water, the men on the bridge of the little escort ship lower their binoculars. They look out across the rolling swells. There, painted against the soft morning light, are the heavy silhouettes of the merchant ships. They are all there. Not a single one is missing. They are still plodding along, a tight, faithful flock, their smokestacks breathing soft white plumes of steam into the dawn. A collective, quiet exhale ripples through the frozen men on the escort. The night has been long, the dark has been heavy, and the shadows have remained hidden. They have done their job. The men on the freighters will wake up soon, boil their water for tea, and look out their portholes to see the little shepherd ships still faithfully pacing the edges, tired and coated in ice, but unwavering. The ocean stretches out before them, vast and indifferent, bathed in the gentle, pale light of the morning. The convoy sails on, a slow, determined procession moving toward the distant horizon. And as the sun begins to climb, touching the icy railings with a soft, golden warmth, the exhausted shepherds simply turn up their collars, grip the rails anew, and continue their quiet, endless walk along the fences of the sea. They ask for no glory, and they expect no praise. They only ask that the flock makes it safely to the shore, carried home by the gentle grace of the morning light. For a very long time, the men who crossed the great dark water believed that the sky belonged only to the stars, the drifting clouds, and the lonely, wandering seabirds. To sail the open ocean in those early years was to exist in a flat, horizontal world. There was the surface, where the heavy merchant ships rolled gently over the swells, and there was the deep, where the quiet shadows slipped blindly through the dark. But the vast, sweeping dome of the sky above them was an empty sanctuary. It was a place to look up and find a moment of peace. A tired sailor could lean against an icy railing, tilt his head back, and lose himself in the sheer, infinite scale of the heavens, feeling a comforting certainty that the clouds held no secrets and the sun was his only companion. But the world was changing, and soon, a new kind of sound began to weave its way into the ancient, rushing song of the sea wind. It starts as a vibration you feel more than you hear. It is not the deep, rhythmic thrumming of a ship's diesel engine traveling up through the floor plates. It is a steady, resonant hum, drifting down from the misty ceiling of the world. On the deck of a slow-moving freighter, an older sailor pauses in his work. He sets down his heavy coil of damp rope and slowly lifts his head. He pulls down the brim of his woolen cap, squinting against the harsh, silver glare of the morning light, searching the bruised gray clouds. And then he sees it. Breaking through the mist, soaring high above the endless field of whitecaps, is a beautiful, silver silhouette. It has long, graceful wings that hardly seem to move, gliding steadily over the vastness of the ocean. It is a long-range patrol plane, a guardian of the air, arriving to break the profound solitude of the sea. As the heavy aircraft banks gently, catching the morning sun on its painted metal skin, a wave of profound, sweeping relief washes over the men on the ships below. For weeks, they have felt like tiny, forgotten islands drifting in a hostile void. They have stared into the dark water until their eyes burned, waiting for the unseen to strike. But now, they are no longer entirely alone. The sky has opened up, and it has sent them a shepherd with wings. The older sailor on the deck feels a sudden, unexpected warmth in his chest. He raises a thick, calloused hand, giving a slow, grateful wave to the sky, feeling as though a protective hand has just been placed gently upon his tired shoulder. Up in the heavens, inside the vibrating metal belly of the aircraft, the world looks entirely different. The air up here is incredibly thin and bitterly cold. It does not smell of salt and wet hemp like the ships below. It smells of hot oil, sweet aviation fuel, and the rich, dark aroma of coffee steaming from a dented tin thermos. The men who fly these massive machines are wrapped in heavy sheepskin jackets and thick leather boots, their faces framed by soft fleece collars and the dark bands of their goggles. They are so young, these boys of the air. They are quiet men from prairie towns and mountain valleys, boys who learned to drive on dusty country roads and now find themselves suspended thousands of feet above the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. To them, the sea is not a towering wall of freezing water. From the cockpit window, the ocean looks like a beautifully wrinkled blue blanket, stretching out into infinity. The terrifying, massive waves that toss the freighters like wooden toys look no bigger than the tiny ripples in a neighborhood pond. In the glass nose of the aircraft, a young navigator sits at a small, folding metal desk. The entire plane shakes with a constant, numbing vibration, a steady rattle that he has simply learned to tune out. He holds a pair of heavy binoculars to his eyes, scanning the endless blue canvas for hours on end. The sheer monotony of the whitecaps is hypnotic, a mesmerizing pattern of blue and white that threatens to lull him into a deep, waking sleep. He rubs his tired eyes, resting the binoculars on his chest, and reaches into his flight suit. He pulls out a small piece of chocolate, wrapped in silver foil. He breaks it in half and passes a piece over his shoulder to the pilot sitting behind him. They do not speak over the roar of the engines, they only share a quiet nod, a tiny, unspoken moment of camaraderie in the freezing air. The navigator looks down at the convoy below. From up here, the massive, iron-hulled merchant ships look unbelievably fragile. They look like little wooden splinters, huddled closely together, creeping at a painfully slow pace across the vastness of the water. He feels a sudden, overwhelming surge of protective tenderness for the men on those ships. He knows they are older men, men with wives and children, men who are freezing and exhausted on those wet decks. He pulls a small, worn notebook from his pocket and balances it on his knee, using his pencil to press firmly against the shaking paper. He is writing a letter to his younger brother. "We found them again today," he writes, his handwriting jagged from the vibration of the engines. The ships look so small from the clouds, like a little row of ducklings following each other across a very big pond. It's strange to think of all those men down there, trusting us to be their eyes. When we fly over them, I can almost feel them looking up, breathing a little easier. I like to think we are weaving a big, invisible blanket over them, keeping the shadows away. It's freezing up here, and the engine noise never stops, but when I see those little ships safe in the water, it makes the cold feel a little less sharp. But while the arrival of the wings brings a beautiful, quiet peace to the men on the surface, it brings a sudden, heavy sorrow to the men in the deep. For the young boys sealed inside the iron belly of a submarine, the sky was once their only refuge. After days of breathing stale, suffocating air, living in the damp, dripping dark of the pressure hull, the surface of the ocean was a paradise. The night sky was the one place they could open the heavy hatch, stand on the bridge, and feel human again. They would tilt their pale faces to the stars, breathe in the sweet, pure wind, and remember that there was a beautiful universe waiting for them above the water. Now, that sanctuary has been gently, but firmly, taken away. The ocean has shrunk. The endless, empty dome of the heavens is suddenly full of eyes. Deep within the submarine, the men know that if they linger on the surface for even a moment too long, if their white weight catches the light in just the wrong way, a shadow will fall across the water, and the silver bird will fold its wings and dive. There is no dramatic panic in this realization, only a quiet, heavy resignation. A young submariner sits in his narrow bunk, holding a small mirror, trying to remember what he looked like with the sun on his face. He listens to the soft hum of the electric motors, knowing they will be staying down in the dark for much, much longer now. The world above them has become a place of watchful caution. They must creep like mice beneath the floorboards of the sea, holding their breath, listening for the distant drone of engines in the sky. It is a profound psychological shift, a gentle closing of the door to the upper world, leaving them entirely to the quiet, creeping embrace of the abyss. As the afternoon slowly bleeds into evening, the golden light of the setting sun begins to paint the clouds in breathtaking shades of peach, lavender, and bruised purple. The ocean turns into a mirror of molten copper, beautiful and incredibly still. Up in the patrol plane, the fuel gauges are beginning to drop, the needles resting gently near the red warning lines. The pilot, his hands stiff inside his heavy gloves, knows it is time to turn back toward the distant shore. He pushes the yoke, and the massive aircraft banks gracefully, preparing to leave the flock behind for the night. But before he sets his course for home, he does something beautifully simple and profoundly human. He reaches out and gently wiggles the control yoke from side to side. The great silver wings of the bomber tip downward, first to the left, and then to the right. It is a slow, majestic waggle of the wings, dipping toward the ships below. It is the language of the sky, a silent, graceful salute. It says, "We are leaving now, but we see you. You are brave, and you are not forgotten." Down on the darkening ocean, the men on the freighters watch the plane tip its wings. A collective, quiet sigh seems to rustle through the fleet. The older sailor on the deck raises his hand one last time, watching as the silver bird grows smaller and smaller, melting into the brilliant colors of the sunset until it is nothing more than a memory in the clouds. The droning of the engines slowly fades away, absorbed once again by the eternal, rushing song of the sea wind. The sky is empty once more. But the ocean feels different now. The solitude has been broken, not by anger, but by a quiet, protective grace. The night begins to fall, wrapping the ships in a heavy, starlit velvet. The sailors go below deck to their warm, swaying bunks, pulling their rough woolen blankets up to their chins. They close their eyes, and as they drift into a deep and peaceful sleep, they no longer feel like tiny, forgotten islands. They know that somewhere, far beyond the horizon, young men in heavy sheepskin coats are resting, waiting to take to the clouds again when the morning comes. The sky is watching over them, a gentle, unseen guardian, keeping the shadows at bay and wrapping the weary flock in the soothing, quiet promise of tomorrow. There is a heavy, quiet weight to a piece of paper folded perfectly in the dark, carrying words that a man knows may never see the light of day. As the long, endless months of the ocean crossing slowly blurred together, a deep and profound exhaustion began to settle over the Atlantic. It was not the sharp, frantic fatigue of a single sleepless night, but a slow, heavy blanket of weariness that seemed to drape itself over everything. It settled into the rusting iron hulls of the ships, it settled into the frayed, damp canvas of the sails, and most of all, it settled into the very bones of the men who sailed upon the water. The ocean itself seemed tired, its great, rolling swells moving with a slow, sluggish rhythm, carrying the weight of a million unseen shadows. On the surface, the merchant sailors moved across their decks like quiet, heavy sleepwalkers. The biting winds and the freezing spray had worn away their youthful energy, leaving behind a stoic, quiet endurance. Beneath the surface, the young men in the submarines lived in a state of suspended twilight, their bodies pale and their eyes heavy from breathing the stale, sour air of the deep. Both sides of the great, dark water were bound by this shared, silent fatigue. The war had ceased to be a grand, frightening adventure. It had become a slow, gentle wearing down of the spirit, a test of how long a human heart could endure the absolute isolation of the sea. In this state of profound weariness, the men found their sanctuary not in sleep, for sleep was often broken and brief, but in the quiet, delicate act of writing. Deep inside the belly of a slow-moving freighter, the air is thick with the smell of warm oil and roasted coffee. The ship creaks and groans, a continuous, soothing wooden symphony as it rides the long ocean swells. In a small, dimly lit cabin, an older sailor sits on the edge of his narrow bunk. His hands are thick and rough, the knuckles scarred from years of hauling icy ropes and turning heavy iron valves. Yet, he holds a slender fountain pen with incredibly gentle, deliberate care. Resting on his knee is a small pad of thin, pale blue paper. The light from a single, caged bulb swings slowly above him, casting a warm, dancing shadow across the page. He is writing a letter to his wife, a woman who lives in a small, rainy village perched on the edge of a distant cliff. He pauses, the silver nib of his pen hovering just above the paper. He is so incredibly tired. His shoulders ache, and the cold of the sea wind seems permanently settled in his joints. But he does not write about the exhaustion. He does not tell her how heavy the darkness feels when he stands his watch at midnight, or how the vastness of the empty horizon sometimes makes it hard to breathe. He knows that the truth of the ocean would only bring a cold wind into her warm kitchen. Instead, he writes to protect her. He writes a beautiful, soft illusion. He tells her that the sea is calm today, rolling like a gentle green meadow. He writes about the ship's cat, asleep by the galley stove, and how the cook baked a fresh loaf of bread that morning. He asks her if the hydrangeas by their front gate have begun to bloom, and he reminds her to have the neighbor check the loose slate on the roof before the autumn rains begin. With every slow, careful loop of his handwriting, he is building a tiny, invisible bridge back to the world of the living. The act of forming the letters soothes the racing of his tired mind. As he writes her name, he can almost smell the lavender soap she keeps by the wash basin. He can almost hear the soft, familiar humming she makes when she tends to the garden. He folds the letter into 3 perfect, even sections. He smooths the crease with his heavy thumb. He does not have an envelope, and he does not know when, or if, the ship will ever reach a port where the mail can be collected. But he carefully unbuttons the chest pocket of his worn canvas jacket and tucks the folded blue paper inside, resting it gently against his heart. Miles away, completely swallowed by the dark water, another man is engaged in the exact same, quiet ritual. Inside the claustrophobic steel walls of a submerged U-boat, the air is unimaginably close. Condensation drips softly from the curving pipes, falling with a gentle plink, plink, plink onto the metal floorboards. The boat is running silently on its electric motors, a soft, high-pitched purr that vibrating through the soles of the men's boots. The dim, red battle lights cast an eerie, bloody glow over the exhausted faces of the crew. In a narrow bunk squeezed between 2 rumbling bulkheads, a very young submariner lies on his side. He is little more than a boy, his face pale and smudged with diesel grease. The air he breathes is thin and tastes of copper and old sweat. He is shivering slightly, pulled deep inside his rough woolen blanket. He holds a tiny, leather-bound notebook and a stub of a pencil. The pages of the notebook are soft and warped from the constant, heavy humidity of the boat. He is writing to his mother. Like the older sailor on the surface, he does not write of the terrifying, crushing weight of the water above him. He does not write of the creeping fear that settles over the boat when the engines are cut and they simply drift in the silent abyss, listening for the sound of danger. He wants only to offer her peace. He writes about the sound of the electric motors, telling her they sound just like the old sewing machine she uses in the parlor. He apologizes for missing the autumn harvest, promising that he will be home to help bring in the apples next year. He writes that he is eating well, that his friends are kind to him, and that she has no reason to worry about her boy. His hand trembles slightly as the submarine shifts, pitching slowly in the deep currents. The pencil lead smudges against the damp paper, leaving a soft gray blur at the end of his sentence. He smiles a small, weary smile, gently blowing on the page as if he could dry the ocean's dampness away. He closes the little notebook and slides it into the breast pocket of his heavy uniform sweater. These are the letters left unsent. They are carried in the pockets of thousands of men, hidden behind layers of wool, canvas, and rubber. They are the most precious cargo the ships carry. As the war stretched on, the men began to realize a quiet, heartbreaking truth. They knew the postal bags might never be filled. They knew the merchant ships might not reach the safety of the harbor, and they knew the iron whales might never rise to break the surface again. They understood that the words they poured onto the page might never be read by the eyes they were meant for. The letters might simply dissolve into the vast, indifferent salt of the deep, vanishing without a trace. Yet, they continued to write. They wrote in the swaying dimness of the galleys, they wrote perched on wooden crates in the engine rooms, and they wrote huddled in their cold, damp bunks. They wrote because the paper was a sanctuary. In a world entirely consumed by metal, noise, and fear, a blank piece of paper was a tiny, quiet room where they could be themselves again. It was a place where a weary sailor was not just a cog in a machine of war, but a husband, a father, a son, a man who loved the smell of rain on cobblestones and the taste of fresh apples. Over time, these unsent letters became physical talismans. The paper grew incredibly soft, worn down by the constant friction of the men's pockets and the dampness of the sea air. The sharp edges of the paper rounded off, feeling more like old, familiar cloth than stationery. In the darkest, quietest hours of the night, when the exhaustion was so deep it felt like a physical ache in their chests, the men would reach into their pockets. They would not take the letters out to read them, the light was often too dim, and they already knew every single word by heart. They would simply rest their fingers against the folded paper. They would trace the outline of the envelope through the fabric of their coats. Just feeling the physical presence of the letter was enough. It was an anchor dropped into the deepest part of their souls, holding them steady when the ocean tried to sweep them away. It was a tangible piece of their humanity, a quiet declaration that they still belonged to the world of love and light, even as they drifted through the freezing dark. It is a profound and gentle heroism, this quiet keeping of words. To write a message of love, knowing it may never arrive, is an act of pure, unselfish hope. It is a way of whispering to the universe that love is stronger than the ocean, stronger than the shadows, and stronger than the war. If you were to look out across the vast, rolling Atlantic tonight, you would not see these hidden treasures. You would only see the dark water, the whitecaps curling in the wind, and the heavy ships pushing slowly through the mist. But beneath the heavy coats and the thick wool sweaters, thousands of tiny, glowing embers of affection are crossing the sea. The tired men finish their watches. They climb down the narrow, icy ladders, their bodies aching, their eyes heavy with sleep. They strip off their frozen outer layers and crawl into their swaying bunks. As they pull the rough blankets up to their chins, they reach up and gently press a hand to their chests. They feel the soft, worn square of paper resting safely in their pockets. A deep, quiet sigh escapes their lips. The crushing weight of the exhaustion seems to lift, just a little, carried away by the gentle comfort of the unsent words. The ship rocks back and forth, a slow, eternal cradle moving over the deep. The ocean breathes its long, rhythmic breath, a soothing hush that washes over the weary souls above and below the waves. And as the men drift softly down into a deep and dreamless sleep, their letters rest quietly against their beating hearts, holding them safe, holding them warm, and keeping the beautiful light of home alive in the endless, silent dark. There is a place beneath the storms, far below the churning whitecaps and the reach of the sun, where the ocean finally holds its breath. When we think of the great ships and the iron submarines that never return to the harbor, it is easy to imagine them lost in the violent, roaring chaos of the surface. We think of the howling gales, the crashing waves, and the blinding sea spray. But the truth of the ocean is much gentler than that. The violence of the sea is only a thin, restless skin covering a vast, unimaginable depth of peace. When a vessel finally surrenders its buoyancy, when the long, exhausting struggle of the voyage comes to an end, it does not slip into chaos. It slips into a profound, unbroken silence. Imagine the moment a heavy merchant freighter finally lets go of the sky. The roaring of the wind and the crashing of the swells instantly vanish as the great steel bow dips beneath the surface. The terrible noise of the world is replaced by a heavy, velvet hush. The water folds over the highest mast, smoothing out the white foam until the surface is whole once more, as if the ocean is gently closing a door. As the ship begins its long journey down, it loses all its weight and urgency. It is no longer a machine of industry, pushing stubbornly against the tides. It becomes something entirely natural, drifting downward with the slow, swaying grace of an autumn leaf falling through a quiet forest. The descent takes hours. The vessel passes through the shifting layers of the sea. It leaves behind the bright, pale blues of the shallows, sinking softly into the rich, deep indigos, and finally descending into the eternal, ink-black absolute of the abyss. As it falls, a trail of tiny silver bubbles rises toward the surface, carrying the last, lingering breaths of the war up to the sky, leaving nothing behind but stillness. The iron hull cools, the great steam engines fall silent, and the frantic heartbeat of the ship slowly winds down to a complete and perfect stop. Far away, in another patch of the dark water, a slender U-boat makes the exact same journey. The young men inside, who spent weeks holding their breath in the suffocating, humid twilight of their iron tube, feel the gentle, downward pull of gravity. The terrible, vibrating hum of the electric motors hums its final note and fades into the dark. The claustrophobia, the terrifying pressure of the hunt, the aching anticipation, all of it washes away. The submarine spirals softly downward, a sleeping iron whale sinking into the deepest, softest parts of the earth. And what awaits them at the bottom of the world is not a frightening void, but a sanctuary. The abyssal plain of the Atlantic is a vast, rolling desert of pale, silver silt. It is a landscape that has remained untouched and unchanged for millions of years. There are no seasons here. There is no winter frost, no scorching summer sun, no biting wind. There is only the incredibly slow, gentle drift of ancient currents, moving at a pace that barely disturbs the dust. When the great merchant ship finally reaches the seafloor, it touches down with a delicate, muffled sigh. The heavy keel settles into the soft sand, sending up a slow-moving cloud of gray silt that drifts in the water for a long time before falling back down, like a gentle, underwater snowfall, covering the decks in a fine, silver blanket. The ship rests perfectly upright, looking almost as if it is waiting for a quiet, unseen wind to fill its canvas covers and sail it across the sand. Inside the resting ships, the world has stopped. Down in the submerged galleys, the coffee mugs that once slid across the tables in the heavy swells now rest perfectly still in the silt. The swaying light bulbs have ceased their endless, hypnotic pendulum swing. The hands of the brass clocks mounted on the bulkheads have finally stopped ticking, releasing the men from the tyranny of the watches, the schedules, and the relentless marching of time. The men who sailed these vessels are lying in the dark, but they are no longer cold. The biting, freezing wind of the North Atlantic cannot reach them here. The deep exhaustion that pulled at their eyes and weighed down their shoulders has been entirely lifted. They are resting in their narrow canvas bunks, their faces relaxed, the deep lines of worry and fear smoothed away by the gentle touch of the deep water. In the pocket of a rough wool sweater, resting against the chest of a young merchant boy, there is a letter he wrote by the dim light of a lantern just hours before. The paper is perfectly preserved in the stillness, held safely within the dark. It holds the words he wrote to his sweetheart, telling her about the beauty of the stars and the dream of returning to their quiet village. Though the letter will never be delivered to her door, it has not been destroyed. It rests there, an eternal monument to his love, kept safe in the quietest vault on earth. Beside him, an older sailor's hand rests near a small, polished stone his grandson gave him for luck. The stone, worn smooth by the boy's small fingers, is now returned to the earth, resting in the palm of a man who has finally found his peace. The heavy burdens they carried on the surface, the fear of the unseen shadows, the responsibility for the cargo, the desperate longing for home, have all dissolved. They are just men who have been granted the longest, most peaceful shore leave. Miles away across the silver dunes, the U-boat rests quietly on its side, half buried in the soft sand. It is no longer a weapon. The long, curved hull is just a quiet shelter, a silent iron dome holding 50 sleeping souls. The young submariner who spent his nights listening to the terrifying, cracking sounds of the deep through his heavy headphones is asleep now, his ears filled with nothing but the most profound, unbroken silence. The cook, who used to pass out tiny pieces of dried apple to soothe the nervous boys, rests peacefully near his galley, his apron still tied around his waist. The commander, who carried the immense, crushing weight of all those lives on his shoulders, is finally relieved of his command. He does not have to make any more impossible choices. He does not have to peer through a periscope into the dark. He can simply rest. Pinned to the curved, metal wall beside a young mechanic's bunk is a photograph of a little girl sitting on a wooden bicycle. Because there is no sunlight to bleach the image, and no wind to tear the paper, her bright, innocent smile will remain there, looking down at him, perfectly preserved in the dark for 1,000 years. The love they carried with them into the depths does not wash away. It is held there, suspended in the water, a quiet, beautiful echo of their humanity. There is a profound, beautiful equality to the ocean floor. Down here, in the eternal midnight, the surface world simply ceases to matter. The ocean makes no distinction between the rust-streaked steel of a British freighter and the dark iron of a German submarine. It does not see the different flags that once flew from their masts, or the different languages spoken in their corridors. It only sees exhausted men. It embraces the young boy from a coastal fishing village and the young boy from a landlocked farming town with the exact same, impartial grace. They are no longer hunters and hunted. They are no longer locked in a terrifying game of shadows across the whitecaps. They are brothers of the deep, resting side by side in the vast, quiet landscape of the abyss. The sea has laid them down together, wrapping them in a single, heavy blanket of peace, ending the conflict not with a surrender, but with a gentle, soothing hush. For the families standing on the distant shores, looking out at the gray, rolling waves with heavy, aching hearts, the ocean often feels like a cruel and hungry thing. They imagine their loved ones lost in a dark and terrible place. But if they could see the abyssal plain, if they could look down through the miles of blue and purple water to the silver sand below, they would see that their boys are not suffering. They are not lost. They are cradled. The ocean is an ancient, patient keeper of memories. It took these tired, frightened men out of the raging storm and carried them softly down to a place where nothing can ever hurt them again. The sea acts as a gentle curator, preserving their ships, their letters, and their quiet heroism in a museum of perfect stillness. Above them, the seasons will change. The winter gales will howl, whipping the surface into mountains of freezing foam. The summer sun will bake the decks of new ships sailing overhead. Years will turn into decades, and decades into centuries. The world of the surface will continue its loud, frantic, endless spinning. But down here, the water will not change. The stillness will not break. The ships sit like silent, sleeping monuments in the dust. The soft, deep currents brush against the iron hulls with the gentlest of touches, a slow, rhythmic sweeping that sounds like the very breathing of the earth. It is a slow, maternal rocking, an eternal lullaby for the men who gave everything they had to the water. There is nothing left to fear. There is no more watch to stand, no more cold to endure, no more darkness to search. The long, exhausting voyage is completely, beautifully over. They have slipped beneath the noise, beyond the reach of the war, and into the silent abyss. They are held safely in the deep, resting softly on the silver sand, entirely untroubled, enveloped forever in the warm, quiet grace of a deep and dreamless sleep. The ocean is a quiet thief. It takes the bright, eager youth of a boy and replaces it with the heavy, rusted wisdom of an old man. When the long, dark voyages finally drew to a close, and the invisible threads of the deep allowed the iron whales to turn their weary faces toward home, the boats that emerged from the morning mist were not the same vessels that had left. They moved with a slow, hesitant limp, like exhausted creatures pulling themselves out of a deep and terrible slumber. As the rugged outlines of the coast finally broke through the heavy sea fog, there was no grand, triumphant roar from the engines. There was only a low, rattling wheeze, a tired exhalation of machinery that had given absolutely everything it had to the dark water. If you were to stand on the quiet, gray edge of the pier as one of these boats drifted into the harbor, the very first thing you would notice is the rust. The sea is a hungry, relentless thing, and over the long months submerged in the freezing abyss, it had chewed away at the pride of the vessel. The once sleek, dark gray paint of the hull was gone, scoured away by the biting salt and the violent friction of the winter gales. In its place, long, weeping streaks of burnt orange, deep brown, and pale yellow bled down the curving sides of the conning tower. These streaks of rust looked incredibly poignant in the soft morning light. They looked like tears. It was as if the iron itself was weeping, wearing the scars of the abyss for the whole world to see. The wooden decking was splintered and bleached white by the sun and the salt, the heavy iron railings bent and twisted by the sheer, crushing force of the ocean's waves. The boat smelled of dead seaweed, of exhausted oil, and of the deep, ancient cold of the abyssal plains. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking testament to survival, a battered, fragile shell that had held back the crushing dark and managed, against all odds, to bring its children home. But the rust on the iron was nothing compared to the profound, withering change in the men who stood quietly on the upper deck. As the boat slowly nudged against the wooden pilings of the pier, the crew lined up along the casing to secure the heavy mooring lines. They moved with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. Their bodies were incredibly thin, their uniforms hanging loosely from their shoulders, the fabric stiff and white with months of dried sea salt. They did not wave. They did not shout or cheer. They simply stood there, gripping the icy rails, blinking against the gentle morning light as if it were something entirely foreign and strange to them. These were the young boys who had left the shore just months ago with bright eyes and nervous, eager smiles. But the sea had washed their youth away. Their faces were pale, a ghostly, translucent white from living in the artificial twilight of the submerged hull. Their cheeks were hollowed out by rationing and profound, relentless anxiety. Thick, untamed beards hid their young jaws, making them look like weary old men from a forgotten, ancient era. To look into their eyes was to look into the very depths of the Atlantic itself. Their gazes were wide and incredibly still, carrying what sailors quietly called the 1,000-yard stare. It was the look of men who had spent far too long staring into the pitch-black void, waiting for shadows to move. They were looking at the wooden docks, the stone houses, and the green pine trees on the hills, but part of their minds was still trapped in the cramped, humid belly of the submarine. They were still listening for the terrifying, high-pitched ping of the hunting sonar. They were still bracing their legs against the roll of a deck that was finally, mercifully, perfectly still. Down below, inside the silent pressure hull, the quiet work of returning was taking place. The heavy, oppressive air of the boat was finally beginning to clear as the open hatches allowed the sweet, earthy smell of the land to drift down into the corridors. It smelled of wet grass, of wood smoke from the village chimneys, and of damp earth. To the men inside, this scent was so overwhelmingly beautiful that it made their chests ache. In the tiny, cramped radio room, a young boy sits on his small metal stool for the very last time. He reaches up and slowly turns the heavy, black dials, clicking off the glowing amber vacuum tubes one by one. The mesmerizing, rushing hiss of the ocean's static fades into a profound silence. He pulls the heavy leather headphones from his ears and rests them gently on the desk. He opens the small, metal drawer where he keeps his personal things. Inside is a thin stack of letters from his mother, the edges soft and worn to the texture of fine velvet from being read 100 times in the dark. Beside them is a single, dried leaf he picked up from the pavement on the day he departed. He picks up the leaf, tracing its brittle veins with a trembling, grease-stained finger. He had carried this tiny piece of the land with him to the very bottom of the sea, a fragile anchor to the world of the living. He places the letters and the leaf into his canvas duffel bag. As he stands up, he catches a glimpse of his reflection in the dark, polished glass of the instrument panel. He stops, his breath catching in his throat. The face looking back at him belongs to a stranger. The soft, rounded cheeks of the boy who left are gone, replaced by sharp angles and dark, heavy shadows beneath his eyes. He touches his own face, feeling the rough stubble and the tight, drawn skin. He is only 19 years old, but he feels as though he has lived an entire, exhausting lifetime in the span of a single winter. He has aged decades in the dark. Down the narrow aisle, the ship's cook is wiping down the small galley stove with a clean rag. He moves with a slow, comforting rhythm. He watches the young crewmen pack their bags, his heart aching with a quiet, paternal sorrow. He knows exactly what these boys are carrying inside them. They are carrying the heavy ghosts of the sea. They are carrying the memory of the long, terrifying nights when the boat was entirely silent, and the only sound was the creaking of the hull under the crushing pressure of the water. They are carrying the heartbreaking memory of the distant, burning silhouettes of the merchant ships they were ordered to hunt, ships filled with men just like them, boys who also had mothers waiting by the window. The ocean forces a terrible intimacy upon the men who fight upon it, wrapping them all in the same freezing dark, and the survivors carry the weight of that shared tragedy in their bones. The cook steps out of the galley and places a warm, gentle hand on the young radio man's shoulder. The boy jumps slightly, startled by the touch, his nerves still frayed and raw. But then he looks up into the older man's kind, wrinkled eyes. "We are home, lad," the cook whispers, his voice as soft as the morning mist. "You can leave the water behind now. Leave it in the boat." The boy nods, a single, hot tear spilling over his lower lid and cutting a clean path through the engine dust on his cheek. He does not wipe it away. He just lets it fall, a tiny drop of salt water returning to the earth. When the men finally climb the narrow iron ladder and step off the boat onto the solid wooden planks of the pier, their legs are unsteady. The earth feels strange and impossibly hard beneath their boots. They sway slightly, their bodies instinctively trying to roll with waves that are no longer there. There is a small crowd waiting for them on the dock. It is not a loud, cheering parade. The people of the coastal towns know better than to shout at men who have just returned from the silence. It is a quiet, breathless gathering of mothers, wives, and fathers, huddled in their heavy coats, their eyes desperately scanning the pale faces of the returning crew. A woman in a worn gray shawl steps forward. She is looking for her husband, the man who kissed her goodbye in the rain so many months ago. When she finally sees him, standing near the rusted conning tower with his canvas bag slung over his shoulder, she stops. She sees the deep lines etched into his forehead. She sees the way his hands tremble as he holds the strap of his bag. She sees the profound, heavy exhaustion that has settled over his entirely changed frame. But she does not hesitate. She walks softly across the damp wood and wraps her arms entirely around him. The sailor drops his bag. It hits the dock with a soft, heavy thud. He buries his face in the soft wool of her shawl, breathing in the scent of lavender and clean rain. He closes his eyes, and for the first time in an eternity, his shoulders drop. The rigid, terrifying tension that has held his spine perfectly straight for months simply dissolves. He leans his entire weight into her, and she holds him, completely absorbing the sorrow, the rust, and the weariness of the deep. She runs her hand through his tangled hair, whispering quiet, soothing reassurances into his ear, telling him over and over again that the dark is gone, and he is safe. All along the pier, these quiet, beautiful reunions unfold in the mist. Fathers hold their sons, resting their chins on the boys' shoulders, too overwhelmed to speak. Young women press their hands against the pale, bearded faces of their sweethearts, learning the new lines and angles of the men they love, silently accepting the ghosts that have come back with them. They know that the sea has changed these men forever. They know that there will be nights when the wind howling around the eaves of the house will cause the sailors to wake up in a cold sweat, their hands reaching for a bulkhead that is no longer there. They know that the healing will be as slow and gentle as the turning of the tides. But for now, in this quiet, misty morning, it is enough that they are standing on solid ground. Behind them, the rusted iron whale bobs gently in the calm water of the harbor. Its long, exhausting journey is over. The heavy diesel engines are cold, the terrible pressure of the abyss is 1,000 miles away, and the thick, suffocating air of the hull is being washed clean by the fresh breeze of the shore. The rust on its sides will dry in the sun, a quiet, fading monument to the unimaginable endurance of the human spirit. The men slowly turn away from the water. They link arms with their families, their boots scuffing softly against the cobblestones as they walk up the hill toward the warm, glowing windows of the town. They walk away from the shadows, away from the freezing spray, and away from the heavy, infinite emptiness of the ocean. They are carrying their memories, yes. They will always carry the quiet ghosts of the sea. But as they step into their warm kitchens, as they sit in comfortable chairs by crackling hearths, and as they finally close their eyes on soft, dry pillows, the terrible roar of the Atlantic begins to fade. It softens into a gentle, distant whisper, a soothing lullaby that washes away the rust of the war, leaving behind only the quiet, beautiful peace of a long and well-deserved rest. The boys who aged in the dark have finally found the light, and the ocean simply breathes its eternal breath, watching over the silent, resting ships as the world slowly drifts into a gentle, healing sleep. There is a morning, out on the vast and rolling water, when the heavy air simply decides to let go. For longer than anyone could remember, the Atlantic had been a place of drawn breath. It was a stretched and trembling string, vibrating with the quiet, continuous ache of anticipation. The men who sailed across it had forgotten what it felt like to stand under the open sky without bracing their shoulders against the unseen dark. They had lived for so many seasons wrapped in a thick, suffocating cloak of caution, measuring their lives in the slow, terrifying miles between the safe harbors. But then, ever so gently, the rhythm of the ocean begins to change. It does not happen all at once. There is no loud, triumphant ringing of bells across the water, no sudden parting of the heavy, bruised clouds. It is a subtle thing. It is a slow, quiet softening of the world, like the gradual melting of winter ice on a window pane. It begins as a whisper in the sea wind, a feeling that the immense, crushing weight of the shadows has finally begun to lift. If you were to step down into the warm, vibrating belly of a merchant freighter during this shifting of the tide, you would feel it immediately. In the dimly lit mess hall, where the air smells of roasted barley, worn leather, and damp wool, the men are gathered around the scarred wooden tables. For years, this room has been a place of hushed, nervous energy. The sailors would sit with their backs straight, their ears subconsciously tuned to the terrifying, sudden ringing of the alarm bells. They would hold their tin cups of water tightly, as if preparing for the floor beneath them to suddenly vanish. But today, look at the way they are sitting. An older sailor, a man whose hair has turned the color of seafoam over the course of the war, is leaning heavily against the wooden bulkhead. His long, sturdy legs are stretched out beneath the table. His shoulders, which have been pulled up tightly toward his ears for months on end, have finally dropped. He lets out a long, slow sigh, a sound that seems to carry 1,000 miles of weariness out of his chest and into the warm air of the room. In his calloused, scarred hands, he holds a thick ceramic mug of hot tea. The steam rises from the dark liquid in gentle, curling ribbons, catching the warm, golden light of the swaying overhead bulb. He does not gulp the tea down in a hurried rush of survival. He brings the heavy mug to his lips slowly, closing his eyes as the sweet, milky warmth touches his tongue. For the very first time in a long, long while, he actually tastes the tea. He tastes the sugar, the warmth, the simple, beautiful comfort of a quiet moment. He lowers the mug and looks across the table. Sitting opposite him is a young boy, barely out of school, who has spent his first months at sea jumping at every creak of the hull. The older man smiles. It is not the tight, forced smile of false bravery they used to share in the pitch black. It is a genuine, soft curve of his withered cheeks. His eyes crinkle at the corners. The young boy sees this, and a slow, matching smile spreads across his own face. They do not say a word. The entire room is filled with this quiet, cautious exhale. It is the sound of ordinary men realizing, with a fragile, beautiful wonder, that they are going to make it to the morning. This gentle loosening of fear reaches into every corner of the ship. Down the narrow, echoing passageway, in a cramped cabin tucked behind the boiler room, another sailor sits on the edge of his narrow bunk. The ship rocks beneath him, a slow, deep, swaying cradle moving over the swells. He has his small, battered writing pad balanced on his knee, and his favorite fountain pen in his hand. For so many nights, he has written letters filled with careful omissions. He has written beautiful, protective lies to his wife, shielding her from the terrifying truth of the deep water. But tonight, the ink flows differently. The tension that usually grips his wrist is gone. "My darling," he writes, his letters sloping gracefully across the pale blue paper. "The water feels different today. I cannot fully explain it, but the sky feels a little wider, and the sea feels a little kinder. For so long, the ocean felt like a great, dark wall keeping us apart. But today, as I look out at the whitecaps, it just looks like a road. A long, rolling road that is finally leading me back to your door." He pauses, listening to the steady, comforting thrum of the ship's great engine. It sounds less like a desperate heartbeat now, and more like a steady, marching drum. I walked out on the deck this evening without flinching at the shadows. I watched the sunset, and it was just a sunset. Beautiful and quiet. We are painting the spare room yellow when I get back, just like you wanted. I am coming home to you, my love. I am finally coming home. He folds the paper smoothly, running his thumb over the crease, and tucks it into its envelope. There is a lightness in his chest, a blossoming ember of hope that chases the damp chill from his bones. Up above, on the open wings of the bridge, the night has settled over the convoy. In the darkest years, a clear, moonlit night was a terrifying thing. The silver light of the moon would turn the ocean into a glowing stage, perfectly silhouetting the heavy freighters for the unseen hunters below. The men would curse the cloudless skies, praying for fog and rain to hide them. But tonight, the moon is full and bright, and it is simply beautiful. A watchman stands at the icy rail, wrapped in his heavy coat. He looks out across the water. The moonlight casts a wide, shimmering ribbon of silver across the rolling swells. He can see the other ships in the convoy clearly. They look like a herd of great, sleeping beasts, moving peacefully together through the dark. Their smokestacks push soft, white plumes of steam into the starry sky. The watchman realizes, with a profound sense of awe, that he is not afraid. The silence of the night is no longer the heavy, agonizing silence of a hunter waiting in the dark. It is just the natural, ancient quiet of the open sea. The invisible threads of tension that connected the ships to the deep have softly, quietly snapped. Out on the very edges of the gathering, the little escort ships are still there. The shepherds are still pacing the perimeter, their thin, sharp bows cutting through the cold water. But even they move with a different grace. The frantic, darting anxiety of the early years has smoothed out into a steady, confident glide. From the bridge of a nearby escort, A small, shielded signal lamp flashes a brief, rhythmic pulse of yellow light toward the merchant ship. It is not a frantic warning of danger. It is not an order to scatter into the dark. It is simply a quiet, neighborly goodnight passing between friends on the water. The watchman on the freighter smiles, pulling his warm woolen scarf up around his chin, and watches the little light fade back into the peaceful night. Beneath the surface, the ocean is slowly reclaiming its vast, untroubled depths. The heavy, iron shadows that once stalked the dark waters are fading. The silent, suffocating hunt has slowly drained away, leaving the deep abyssal plains to the ancient currents and the slow-drifting whales. The sea does not hold onto the memories of the conflict. It washes them away with every passing tide, smoothing out the water, healing the scars left by the waking world. The ocean is returning to its true nature. It is not a battlefield. It is a vast, beautiful wilderness, a gentle cradle holding the sleeping ships in its endless, watery arms. As the long night progresses, the men on the merchant ship sink into a sleep they have not known for years. In the swinging hammocks and the narrow bunks, the shallow, fitful rest of the hunted is replaced by a deep, heavy, restorative slumber. They dream of green hills, of cobblestone streets wet with warm rain, of teacups clinking on saucers in sunlit kitchens. They dream of the future. The old freighter sails on, rising and falling over the swells with a slow, magnificent dignity. The wood creaks, the iron groans gently, and the water rushes past the hull in a continuous, soothing shhhh. It is the sound of miles being safely crossed. It is the sound of distance closing. Eventually, the deep charcoal of the night sky begins to soften. A pale, delicate pink bruised with soft violet begins to touch the eastern horizon. The stars slowly fade, tipping their hats to the approaching dawn. As the sun breaks over the edge of the world, it bathes the rusted, salt-stained ships in a warm, golden light. The men wake up. They stretch their aching limbs, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. They step out onto the dew-covered decks and feel the gentle warmth of the sun on their faces. They look around at their faithful flock, still sailing safely beside them. The tide has turned. The long, terrifying storm has finally broken, leaving in its wake a calm, glittering sea. The world breathes a soft, collective sigh of relief, the tension dissolving into the fresh morning air. The sailors turn their faces toward the sun, toward the distant, waiting shores, and simply let the gentle, rocking rhythm of the ocean carry them safely, quietly, beautifully home. There is a profound and heavy stillness that settles over a home when it finally realizes that its children are never coming back. On the rugged, windswept edge of the French coast, where the Bay of Biscay meets the endless expanse of the Atlantic, there are structures that do not belong to the natural world. They are the U-boat pens, massive, towering cathedrals of poured concrete and heavy iron, built to shelter the iron whales from the angry sky. Their walls are incredibly thick, designed to withstand the very end of the world, and their enormous roofs cast long, dark, permanent shadows over the water. Not so long ago, these cavernous spaces were alive with a deafening, frantic energy. They were the bustling, beating heart of the submarine war. If you had stood on these concrete docks just a few seasons prior, the air would have vibrated with the roar of massive diesel engines being tested, the sharp hiss of welding torches painting the walls with showers of golden sparks, and the loud, echoing shouts of thousands of men. The water in the pens was always churning, thick with oil and the constant, restless movement of the dark gray boats sliding in and out of their berths. It was a place of departure, a threshold between the solid, comforting earth and the terrifying, freezing void of the open sea. Young boys, their faces pale and their eyes wide with a quiet, unspoken dread, would march down these docks, carrying their canvas duffel bags, stepping away from the sunlight and into the damp, claustrophobic bellies of their ships. But today, if you were to walk into one of those massive concrete pens, you would find only ghosts. The roaring engines have been silenced. The golden sparks of the welders have faded into the cold, gray stone. The thick, iron doors that once guarded the entrances stand wide open, rusted in place, allowing the gentle sea breeze to wander aimlessly through the cavernous halls. The water inside the pens, once so agitated and bruised by the machinery, has grown perfectly still. It is a deep, dark emerald green, reflecting the curving concrete arches above like a flawless, undisturbed mirror. The silence inside the pens is not an empty silence. It is a heavy, resonant quiet. It is the kind of silence that amplifies the smallest of sounds. The soft, rhythmic slap, slap, slap of the tide against the concrete pillars echoes down the long, empty corridors. A single drop of condensation falls from the high ceiling, hitting the dark water with a delicate, musical plink that seems to ring in the air for minutes. Walking slowly along the edge of the empty berth is an older man, a mechanic who was left behind to tend to the dying machinery. He wears a faded blue coverall, his hands permanently stained with the grease and oil of 100 different engines. His hair is thinning and entirely gray. He walks with a slight limp, his boots scuffing softly against the floor. He stops at the edge of berth number 4. The dock is entirely empty. The heavy mooring cleats, once polished smooth by the constant friction of thick hemp ropes, are beginning to wear a soft, orange coat of rust. The old mechanic looks down at the concrete. There is a dark, soaked-in stain of engine oil near the edge of the water. He remembers the boat that used to park here. More importantly, he remembers the boys. He remembers a young machinist's mate, a boy with a gap-toothed smile and a shock of messy blonde hair, who used to sit on an overturned crate right on that very spot, playing a quiet, mournful tune on a silver harmonica while the boat was being loaded. The old mechanic remembers how he used to pretend to be annoyed by the music, waving a greasy wrench and telling the boy to get back to work. Now, the old man closes his eyes and listens to the echoing drip of the water, and he would give anything, absolutely anything, to hear the clumsy, sweet notes of that harmonica just one more time. He reaches into his pocket, his rough fingers brushing against the smooth wooden pipe he no longer smokes, and lets out a long, trembling sigh. The boat is weeks overdue. The numbers have been erased from the chalkboard in the harbor master's office. The boy is gone, resting somewhere in the deep, cold dark, and all that remains is a patch of stained concrete and the phantom echo of a song in an old man's memory. This heavy, waiting sorrow reaches far beyond the thick walls of the concrete pens. It spills out into the narrow, cobblestone streets of the coastal towns that surround the base. These quiet French villages, with their painted wooden shutters and slate roofs, had formed a strange, complex relationship with the young men of the submarines. To the locals, these boys were the occupiers, the enemy. But when you look closely into the eyes of an exhausted 19-year-old boy who has just spent a month in a steel coffin, it is very hard to see a monster. You only see a frightened, homesick child. In a small cafe near the waterfront, the afternoon sun slants through the dusty windows, casting warm, golden rectangles across the scuffed wooden floorboards. A few years ago, this room would have been thick with cigarette smoke and the loud, nervous laughter of submariners on their final night of leave. They would drink heavy red wine, sing folk songs from their distant hometowns, and try desperately to forget the terrifying, crushing pressure of the ocean that was waiting for them in the morning. Today, the cafe is nearly empty. The owner, a woman with kind eyes and a face lined with the deep wisdom of a life lived by the sea, slowly wipes down the zinc counter with a damp cloth. She moves with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. In the corner, a small record player spins a soft, melancholic instrumental tune, the needle hissing faintly against the vinyl. She looks at a table near the window. It is empty, but she remembers the 4 young crewmen who used to sit there every time their boat came into port. They were so polite, always trying out their broken, clumsy French, asking for extra sugar for their coffee. She remembers how they would sit in silence for the first hour, just staring out the window at the solid ground, as if they couldn't quite believe the earth wasn't swaying beneath their chairs. She hasn't seen them since the leaves turned brown last autumn. She knows the arithmetic of the sea. She knows they are not coming back. She pauses in her wiping, resting her hands on the cool metal of the counter, and offers a quiet, private prayer for the mothers of those 4 boys, mothers who live in a country she does not know, but whose grief she understands with the absolute, universal empathy of a woman of the coast. Further up the hill, inside the administration building of the naval base, there is a small room dedicated to the mail. It is lined with hundreds of small, wooden pigeonholes, each one labeled with the designation of a different submarine. For the boats that are out on patrol, the pigeonholes are stuffed full of letters, small packages wrapped in brown paper and twine, and postcards carrying the beautiful, mundane news of the home front. But for the boats that have been quietly declared lost, the protocol is heartbreaking. A young clerk, a boy whose poor eyesight kept him from the boats, stands before the wooden rack. He holds a single letter in his hand. It arrived on the morning train. The handwriting on the envelope is delicate and sloping, penned in a soft, lilac ink. It is addressed to a young navigator whose boat was due back 3 weeks ago. The boat has not broken radio silence. It has not been seen by the patrol planes. It has simply vanished into the vast, indifferent blue. The clerk looks at the pigeonhole. It is empty, save for a thin layer of dust. He knows he is supposed to stamp the letter with a harsh, red ink that reads "Return to sender." He is supposed to send it back to the woman who wrote it, delivering a sudden, devastating blow to a heart that is currently sustained entirely by hope. His hand trembles as he holds the rubber stamp. He looks at the beautiful, hopeful loops of the lilac ink. He cannot bear to break the illusion, not today. Instead, with a quiet, everyday heroism, he simply slips the letter into the wooden slot. He lets it rest there in the shadows. "I am keeping it safe for you," he thinks, a silent whisper to the missing navigator. Just in case. Just in case you find your way out of the dark." The letter sits in the quiet room, a fragile, folded piece of love waiting for a ghost. It holds words about a garden coming into bloom, about a sister who is learning to play the piano, about a world of sunlight and warmth. It is a beautiful, heartbreaking monument to a boy who is currently sleeping in the eternal midnight of the abyssal plain. As the afternoon slowly gives way to the evening, the sun begins to set over the Bay of Biscay. The sky turns the color of bruised peaches and soft, fading lavender. The water of the bay is calm, rolling in long, gentle swells that catch the fading light, turning the ocean into a vast, shimmering blanket of liquid copper. The tide is going out. It pulls away from the cobblestone shores and the massive concrete pillars of the empty pens, whispering a soft, hissing sigh as it retreats over the wet pebbles. It is the sound of the ocean slowly exhaling, releasing the tension of the long, terrible years. The ghosts of the Biscay coast are not restless spirits. They do not haunt the empty docks with anger or sorrow. They are simply memories, as soft and fading as the twilight. They are the lingering echoes of youth, the quiet shadows of boys who asked only to do their duty and return to the people they loved. Now, the coastal towns are returning to the fishermen. The heavy, dark shadow of the war is lifting, blowing away like the morning mist. The concrete pens will slowly succumb to the ivy and the salt, transforming from fortresses of war into quiet, echoing caves where the seabirds will come to nest. The old mechanic locks the iron gate of the dock, putting the heavy brass key into his pocket. The cafe owner turns off the record player and blows out the small candle on the counter. The mail clerk closes the door to the sorting room, leaving the lilac letter to rest peacefully in the dark. They all look out at the water one last time before going home to their warm, softly lit rooms. They look out at the endless, beautiful horizon, and they offer a gentle, silent farewell to the iron whales and the boys who sailed them. The sea darkens, wrapping the coast in a heavy, starlit velvet. The ocean breathes its slow, eternal breath, washing the shores clean, gently rocking the memories of the fallen, and keeping the beautiful, heartbreaking ghosts of the coast forever safe in the long, peaceful slumber of the deep. There is a single, beautiful moment when a long and terrible nightmare finally releases its grip, and you realize you are simply waking up to a quiet morning. Deep beneath the rolling waves of the Atlantic, in the heavy, eternal twilight of the ocean's depths, the final hours of the war were not marked by a sudden, dramatic silence, but by a slow, disbelieving exhale. For weeks, the men sealed inside the iron whales had been living on the very frayed edges of their endurance. They were moving through the water like quiet, hunted ghosts, breathing air that was so incredibly sour and thin it made their heads ache and their chests burn. They lived in a state of constant, vibrating tension, listening to the creak of the hull, waiting for a shadow to fall across them, waiting for the sudden, terrifying sound of danger from the surface. But down in the tiny, cramped radio corner, bathed in the soft, eerie amber glow of the dials, a different kind of sound came through the ether. The young radio man sat with his heavy leather headphones pressed tightly against his ears. He was so tired that his eyes were half closed, lulled by the gentle, swaying hum of the electric motors. And then, breaking through the cosmic hiss of the static, came a message. It was not scrambled in the complex, shifting labyrinth of the enigma. It was sent in the clear. It was a simple, unadorned pulse of Morse code, meant for every single ship, every single listener, floating in the dark. Cease hostilities. The young boy stopped breathing for a second. His pencil hovered perfectly still over his damp notepad. He listened as the message repeated, a steady, rhythmic tapping that sounded like the very heartbeat of a new world. He wrote the words down, his hand trembling so violently that the letters looked like jagged little waves. He pulled his headphones down around his neck, the sudden silence of the boat rushing in to fill his ears. He slipped off his stool and walked a few short steps to the control room. He handed the thin slip of paper to the commander. The commander was a man who carried the heavy, unimaginable weight of 50 souls on his shoulders. His face was pale, covered in a thick, dark beard, his eyes ringed with the deep, bruised shadows of 1,000 sleepless nights. He took the paper. He read the 2 simple words. And then, he read them again. He did not shout. He did not cheer. In the crushing, enclosed space of a submarine, grand displays of emotion are quickly swallowed by the dark. Instead, he slowly lowered the piece of paper. He looked up at the young faces of his crew, illuminated by the dim red battle lights. They were watching him, their eyes wide and questioning, sensing the sudden, profound shift in the air. "It is over," the commander whispered, his voice so soft it barely carried over the hum of the gyroscopes. "We are going up." There were no frantic alarms. There was no desperate rushing to man the periscope or load the torpedo tubes. The order to surface was given with a quiet, measured grace. The heavy iron valves were turned by slow, calloused hands. The compressed air rushed into the ballast tanks with a long, drawn-out sigh, pushing the heavy seawater out into the deep. The boat began to rise. It was a gentle, drifting ascent. They floated upward through the heavy, freezing layers of the abyss, leaving behind the crushing pressure and the absolute blackness. They rose through the deep indigos, up into the pale, shifting blues of the surface. In the control room, the men stood perfectly still, their hands resting on the cold steel bulkheads. They could feel the water pressure easing around them. They could feel the heavy, oppressive weight of the war physically lifting from the hull. When the boat finally broke the surface, it did so with a soft, rolling splash. The heavy rocking of the ocean swells immediately took hold of the vessel, rocking it like a cradle. The commander stepped up to the ladder leading to the main hatch. For years, opening this hatch was a moment of pure, concentrated terror. It meant bursting out into the freezing spray, scanning the terrifying sky for the silver wings of the bombers, preparing to fight for their lives in the harsh light of day. But today, the commander moved slowly. He reached up and turned the heavy locking wheel. The metal groaned, and the hatch popped open. The very first thing that struck them was the light. A shaft of pure, brilliant sunlight poured down the narrow iron tunnel, striking the metal floor plates like a physical weight. It was so bright that the men had to shield their eyes, blinking against the sudden, glorious gold. And then came the air. The fresh sea breeze rushed down into the stale, smelling pressure hull. It smelled of sweet, pure salt, of distant rain, and of absolute, untroubled freedom. It swept away the scent of hot diesel, damp wool, and fear. The young men standing at the bottom of the ladder closed their eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. It tasted like life. It tasted like a beautiful, impossible tomorrow. One by one, the crew climbed the ladder and stepped out onto the narrow, wooden decking of the casing. They stood there in the sunlight, a group of pale, trembling boys wrapped in greasy sweaters, looking out at a world they thought they might never see again. The ocean was magnificent. The sky was an unbroken, brilliant tapestry of blue, dotted with small, lazy white clouds. The water was calm, rolling in long, glassy swells that caught the sun and turned it into a million sparkling diamonds. There were no airplanes in the sky. There were no destroyer silhouettes on the horizon. There was just the vast, peaceful beauty of the empty sea. A young machinist, a boy who had spent the last 3 months tending the roaring engines in the deepest, hottest part of the boat, walked slowly to the edge of the railing. He reached out and touched the cold, wet iron. He looked down at the water lapping gently against the rusted hull. He realized, with a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion, that the ocean was no longer trying to kill him. It was just water. It was just a beautiful, rolling meadow of blue. He covered his face with his thick, grease-stained hands and began to weep. They were not tears of sorrow, but a heavy, cleansing flood of absolute relief. A quiet order had accompanied the message of peace. All boats were to surface and fly a black flag from their periscope shears, the international signal of surrender. An older sailor, the boatswain, brought up a piece of dark canvas. He tied it carefully to the halyard and hoisted it up the tall metal mast. The fabric caught the gentle sea breeze and fluttered out softly against the blue sky. In another time, another place, this flag might have been a symbol of bitter defeat. But to the men standing on the deck of that rusted submarine, it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. It was not a flag of surrender, it was a flag of survival. It meant that they were done hiding. It meant that the long, terrifying game of shadows was finally over. It meant that they were going to grow old. The men sat down on the warm, sun-baked wood of the deck. They did not speak much. The profound, surreal peace of the moment was too vast for words. They simply sat together, leaning their tired shoulders against the metal casing, letting the sun warm their pale, freezing skin. The young radio man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his small, worn notebook. It was full of the letters he had written in the dark, the letters he thought his mother would never read. He opened to a fresh page. The bright sunlight made the paper look incredibly white. He unscrewed the cap of his fountain pen and began to write. He didn't have to invent a beautiful lie anymore. He didn't have to pretend that the ocean was calm when it was actually raging, or that he was safe when he was terrified. He simply wrote the truth. "Mama," he wrote, his hand finally steady, "I am sitting in the sun. The sky is so blue, and the air smells so incredibly sweet. We are on the surface, and we are not going back down into the dark. The war is over. I am alive, Mama. I am keeping my promise. I am coming home to you." He closed the notebook and held it against his chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic beating of his own heart. Down the deck, the commander leaned against the periscope stand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn wooden pipe that he had not smoked since the day they left the harbor. He filled it slowly, striking a match against the iron rail. He took a long, slow draw, letting the sweet, fragrant smoke curl up into the clear air. He looked at his boys, sitting in the sun, breathing the fresh air, and a deep, profound peace settled over his soul. He had guided them through the valley of the shadow, and he had brought them back into the light. The iron whale simply drifted. Its engines were quiet. It bobbed gently on the swells, a tiny, rusted speck in the middle of a vast and beautiful wilderness. The terrible, crushing weight of the Atlantic had been lifted. The deep and dreamless sleep of the abyss was left behind, replaced by the waking, breathing beauty of the morning. The ocean wrapped its gentle, watery arms around the tired vessel, rocking it softly, carrying the exhausted men on a slow, peaceful tide toward the distant shore and into the quiet, beautiful embrace of the rest of their lives. There is a particular kind of waiting that belongs entirely to the shore, a quiet, enduring vigil kept by those who have trusted their hearts to the vast and wandering sea. When the great, heavy storm of the war finally broke and the skies cleared, a profound silence descended upon the coastal towns. The heavy blackout curtains, those thick, dusty shields that had trapped the warmth inside for so many years, were finally pulled down, allowing the golden lamplight to spill out onto the cobblestone streets once more. The lighthouses opened their great glass eyes, sweeping their comforting, rhythmic beams across the dark water, guiding the rust-streaked, exhausted ships safely into the harbors. There were joyful tears, tight embraces on the wooden docks, and the beautiful, chaotic noise of men returning to the earth. But for many, the end of the conflict did not bring a triumphant return. It brought only the long, settling quiet of an empty horizon. Imagine a small, weathered fishing village, wrapped in the pale, silver mist of early morning. The air smells of wet slate, wood smoke, and the sharp, clean scent of the ocean. A young woman walks slowly down the narrow path that leads to the dunes. She wears a thick, knitted shawl pulled tightly across her shoulders to ward off the damp chill of the sea breeze. Her footsteps make no sound in the soft, gray sand. She walks right to the edge of the water, where the rolling waves collapse into delicate, white lace against the beach. She stands perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the distant line where the ocean meets the sky. It is a line she has stared at for hundreds of days, a line that once held the fragile promise of a familiar silhouette breaking through the morning fog. Now, she knows the arithmetic of the sea. She knows that the date of his expected return has long since passed, quietly slipping off the calendar and into the past. Yet, she does not look at the water with anger. The ocean is too vast, too ancient, and too indifferent to hold a grudge against. It simply exists, breathing in and out with the slow, eternal pull of the tides. In her coat pocket, her fingers trace the worn, frayed edges of a single piece of paper. It is the last letter he ever sent, written in the swaying, amber light of a submerged cabin, promising her that he was safe and thinking only of her. She does not unfold it. She knows every single loop of his handwriting, every smudge of ink, every sweet, protective lie he told to keep her from worrying. She simply holds it against the fabric of her coat, a tiny, physical anchor to the man she loved. Standing there in the mist, she allows herself a moment of profound, quiet sorrow, letting her tears mix with the salty dampness of the ocean air. Up in the village, the aftermath of the war is not marked by loud monuments or grand speeches. It is marked by the quiet, everyday absences that echo in the small rooms of the cottages. It is the empty chair by the hearth, where a father used to sit and mend his fishing nets. It is the dusty pair of heavy boots resting by the back door, waiting for feet that will never step into them again. It is the sudden, deafening silence in the kitchen when a mother reaches for an extra teacup out of habit, only to remember, with a soft, heavy ache in her chest, that she only needs to pour one. The grief of the coast is a unique and gentle thing. When a loved one is lost to the earth, there is a place to go, a quiet stone to visit in a peaceful, shaded churchyard. But when a man is given to the deep, there is no single place to lay a flower. The entire ocean becomes his resting place. And so, the families learn to speak to the water. In the afternoons, when the shadows begin to lengthen and stretch across the cobblestones, the women of the village gather. They do not come together to weep openly or to dwell on the darkness. They come together in a beautiful, unspoken tapestry of shared resilience. They sit in a warm, sunlit parlor, the air smelling of baking bread and brewing tea. An older woman, whose husband never returned from a patrol in the freezing north, sits beside a very young bride whose sweetheart vanished in the deep. The older woman does not offer empty platitudes. She simply reaches out and covers the younger woman's trembling hand with her own warm, calloused palm. They sit in the comfortable silence, listening to the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant, rhythmic rushing of the surf. They share small moments of everyday kindness that become lifelines in the dark. A neighbor quietly leaves a basket of fresh vegetables on the doorstep of a grieving mother. A local baker slips an extra, sweet pastry into the paper bag for a little boy whose father is sleeping in the abyss. They mend each other's clothes, they tend each other's gardens, and they hold each other up with a quiet, unwavering grace. There is a profound, breathtaking heroism in this simple act of carrying on. It is the heroism of waking up each morning, putting on a kettle of water, and choosing to live in a world that feels incredibly empty. It is the quiet courage of a father who takes his son's old, wooden boat out onto the water, casting the nets just as the boy had taught him, honoring his memory not with tears, but with the steady, familiar work of the hands. As the months turn into years, the sharp, breathless pain of the early days begins to soften. It does not disappear, for love of that depth never truly fades. Instead, it slowly transforms. It smooths out, like a piece of sea glass tumbled gently by the waves, turning from something jagged and cutting into something soft, beautiful, and deeply treasured. The letters left behind become their most precious relics. The words written by the dim light of a swaying lantern, the quick scribbles on the back of a photograph, the folded notes tucked into the pockets of heavy canvas coats, these become the sacred texts of their lives. The families read them in the quiet hours of the night, not to mourn the men they lost, but to spend a few precious minutes with the men they loved. The letters bring the sailors back to life, filling the room with their jokes, their hopes, and their unwavering, gentle affection. The young woman on the beach finally takes her hand out of her pocket. The mist is beginning to burn away, revealing a sky of brilliant, unending blue. The sun climbs higher, casting a warm, golden path across the surface of the water, a shimmering road of light that stretches all the way to the horizon. She looks out at the endless waves, and a deep, settling peace washes over her. She realizes that the water touching the tips of her boots is the exact same water that blankets the deep, silent plains where he rests. The ocean is not a wall that separates them, it is a vast, beautiful ribbon that connects them forever. Every time she feels the sea breeze on her face, every time she hears the gentle, rhythmic sigh of the surf, it is a whisper from the deep, telling her that he is safe, that he is completely at peace, and that he is still with her. The healing comes as naturally and inevitably as the changing of the tides. The coastlines, once shrouded in fear and darkness, slowly return to their true nature. The children run and play in the sand, their bright laughter echoing over the water. The fishing boats sail out into the sparkling dawn, their sails catching the pure, clean wind. The lighthouses stand like faithful, silent guardians on the cliffs, keeping watch over a sea that has finally been returned to peace. The widow's horizon is no longer a place of desperate, aching waiting. It has become a place of quiet reflection, a beautiful, open canvas where the memories of the fallen are painted in the soft colors of the sunrise. The great Atlantic breathes its eternal, rhythmic breath. It rises and falls, a vast, soothing cradle that holds the sleeping ships and the quiet memories of the men perfectly safe in the dark. And as the sea wind sweeps through the tall coastal grass, carrying the faint, sweet scent of salt and tomorrow, the heavy hearts on the shore finally find their rest, wrapped forever in the gentle, washing grace of time and the endless, beautiful promise of the sea. Water has a long and perfect memory, but it also possesses the profound and beautiful gift of forgiveness. If you were to stand today on the western shores of Europe, or the rocky, pine-covered coasts of North America, and look out over the vast expanse of the Atlantic, you would see no scars upon the water. The ocean does not hold the shape of the things that have passed through it. It does not remember the violent churning of the propellers, the heavy steel hulls that pushed against its currents, or the desperate, whispered Morse code that once flew invisible through the night sky. When you look at the sea today, you see only the eternal, rolling beauty of the earth. You see a grand, magnificent mirror reflecting the passing clouds, the brilliant gold of the morning sun, and the soft, scattered diamonds of the midnight stars. The waves rise and fall, rushing toward the sand with a gentle, hushing sound, smoothing out the footprints on the beach, washing the shoreline clean over and over again. It is a world entirely at peace, breathing with the slow, steady rhythm of the moon and the tides. But miles out from the safety of the harbor, far beyond the reach of the calling seagulls, and thousands of feet below the sunlit surface, the ocean holds the history of an entire generation perfectly safe in the dark. Down in the deepest, quietest valleys of the sea, where the water is heavy and the temperature never changes, lie the sleeping iron whales and the rusted merchant ships. They rest on the soft, silver plains of the abyss, scattered across the ocean floor like ancient, forgotten monuments in a vast and silent desert. Time moves differently down here. It does not rush. It does not demand. It simply drifts. Over the long, quiet decades, the sea has gently reclaimed these vessels. The harsh, jagged lines of the steel have been softened by the slow, patient accumulation of the ocean's life. The rusted hulls have become flourishing, beautiful reefs. Where the gray paint of war once coated the metal, brilliant blooms of pale white and soft pink coral now grow. Delicate sea anemones sway in the slow-moving currents, like tiny, blooming flowers in a twilight garden. Schools of small, silver fish dart quietly through the open hatches and the empty corridors, bringing a dancing, vibrant life back to the spaces that were once so heavy with fear. The ocean has taken the terrible machinery of conflict and transformed it into a sanctuary. It has wrapped the heavy iron in a soft, living blanket, hiding the rust, smoothing the sharp edges, and turning the remnants of the past into a quiet, thriving nursery for the deep. And what of the men? What of the exhausted, freezing boys who sailed upon the surface, and the pale, trembling young men who drifted in the dark beneath it? They are no longer sailors, and they are no longer soldiers. They have been relieved of their posts. The heavy, suffocating weight of their duty was lifted from their shoulders a long, long time ago. The young boy from the coastal village, who used to sit in his swaying bunk and write beautiful, protective lies to his mother, no longer has to pretend that he is not afraid. His fear dissolved the moment the water embraced him. The young submariner, who spent his youth listening to the terrifying cracks and groans of the pressure hull, no longer has to strain his ears against the dark. The only sound he hears now is the absolute, unbroken silence of eternity. Down here, in the gentle dark, there are no sides. The ocean never cared about the flags that were painted on the metal, or the different languages the boys whispered when they were missing their homes. The sea is the great, compassionate equalizer. It took the frightened boy from the merchant freighter and the exhausted boy from the U-boat, and it laid them down side by side in the silver silt. It covered them both with the exact same, heavy blanket of peace. They are resting together, not as enemies, but as brothers of the deep, bound forever by the profound and silent fraternity of the water. Their personal fears, their everyday heroism, the small, quiet moments when they shared a tin of hot tea or half a piece of stale chocolate, these things were not lost. Love and kindness are heavier than iron, and they do not wash away. The warmth of their humanity is perfectly preserved in the stillness of the deep. The letters they folded into their pockets, the photographs of their sweethearts they pinned to the bulkheads, the lucky stones they carried in their palms, they have all become part of the ocean's quiet tapestry. Up on the surface, the world continued to turn. The sun rose and set, the seasons chased each other across the continents, and the long, slow work of healing began. The young women who stood on the misty beaches, waiting for sails that would never appear, slowly walked back to their cottages. They learned to live with the empty chairs by the hearth. They kept the final letters in small, fragrant cedar boxes, tied perfectly with delicate ribbons. They would take them out on quiet winter evenings, tracing the familiar handwriting with gentle fingers, finding comfort in the words that had crossed the dark water to reach them. As the years drifted by, the sharp, breathless pain of their loss slowly softened. It turned from a jagged stone into a smooth, polished piece of sea glass. Their dark hair turned the color of the silver sea foam, and their faces gathered the beautiful, deep lines of a life well lived. They raised their children, they tended their gardens, and they found joy in the warm sunlight again. And when they looked out at the ocean, they no longer saw a cold and hungry void. They saw a vast, beautiful resting place. They found a deep, abiding comfort in the knowledge that the men they loved were not suffering, but were held safely in the quietest, most peaceful cradle on earth. They realized that every gentle breeze blowing off the whitecaps, every rhythmic rush of the surf against the pebbles, was a soft, continuous whisper from the deep, telling them that all was well. The story of the Wolfpacks and the great convoys is not ultimately a story of iron and darkness. It is, at its very core, a story of the incredible, unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. It is the story of ordinary men who were asked to carry the weight of the world across a freezing, hostile void, and who did so with quiet, unwavering grace. It is the story of the radio operators who stayed awake in the dark to listen for the voices of strangers. It is the story of the cooks who offered warm soup and a kind smile when the fear became too heavy to bear. It is the story of the women who kept the home fires burning, whose love was a beacon that shone brighter than any lighthouse on the cliffs. Time is just like the ocean. It is vast, it is deep, and it washes over everything. It slowly erodes the sharp, painful edges of history, carrying away the sorrow and leaving behind only the profound, beautiful truth of our shared humanity. The ships that cross the Atlantic today are massive, brightly lit cities of steel that move effortlessly over the waves. The people on board sleep in warm, comfortable beds. They walk the decks in the moonlight, listening to music, entirely unaware of the shadows that once crept silently beneath the very water they are sailing upon. And this is exactly as it should be. This is the beautiful, hard-won peace that the boys in the dark purchased with their endurance. They held the line in the freezing night so that the generations that followed could sail in the warm, golden light of the day. As we leave the vast, rolling expanse of the Atlantic, the night is falling once again. But it is not a night to be feared. The sky is a deep, bruised violet, softening into a magnificent canopy of indigo and black. The stars are emerging one by one, cold and brilliant, scattering their pale, silver dust across the heavens. They look down upon the water, perfectly reflected in the slow, glassy swells of the open sea. There is no wind tonight. There is only the gentle, eternal breathing of the ocean. Rise and fall. Rise and fall. Listen to the water. It is a slow, rhythmic hush, a sound that has existed since the very beginning of the world. It is the sound of the earth resting. It is a lullaby for the restless, a soothing balm for the weary heart. If you are carrying a heavy burden tonight, if you are holding onto the sharp edges of your own worries or the creeping shadows of your own fears, let the ocean take them from you. Imagine them sinking down through the dark, heavy water, falling miles and miles away, until they settle softly into the silver dust of the abyss, where they can never trouble you again. The long, exhausting voyage is over. The heavy hatches have been opened, and the pure, sweet air of the night is waiting for you. The watch has ended, and it is finally time to go below deck, to pull the warm blanket up to your chin, and to close your tired eyes. Below you, the silent deep keeps its eternal, perfect peace. The sleeping ships and the quiet boys rest together in the gentle dark, held safely in the arms of the sea. Above you, the stars keep their long, bright vigil. And all around you, the ocean simply breathes. Let the slow, rocking rhythm of the water carry you away. Let the gentle hush of the waves smooth out the edges of the day. You are safe. You are warm. And as the great Atlantic drifts quietly into the endless, starry night, you can finally let go and slip softly, peacefully, into a deep and dreamless sleep.